Chapter 135. As Yen proudly stood in the air above the gate of heavenly mystery, she involuntarily sucked in a breath of cold air as she watched the divine dragon silhouette that crushed the combination of 3 experts from the Devil sect who were comparable to 7th-grade battle saints with a single slap. As expected of a magic array that even the sect master was concerned about, the might of this double calamity dragon head array was indeed terrifying. The gigantic spirit eye above her head that was formed from runes was continuously recording the scenes of the battle within the gate of heavenly mystery while calmly observing the battle. In reality, she was more curious about the inconspicuous owner Boo who was standing within the gate of heavenly mystery. She was actually very curious about why owner Boo would enter the gate of heavenly mystery. However, up until now, owner Boo had not made any moves, so Yen did not pay any attention to him. Instead, she focused all of her attention on the divine dragon silhouette. The Emperor's spirit sense had fused with the divine dragon silhouette and could be considered to have revived him. However, strictly speaking, the Emperor had still fallen. This temporary spirit of the magic array could not exist for long and would eventually disappear. However, before it disappeared, Ji Changfeng wanted to eliminate all of the hidden dangers. Perhaps this was something that Ji Changfeng had planned for a long time. King Yu knelt on the ground. His unwillingness had long been shattered by the destructive dragon claw. Facing that kind of power, King Yu had no choice but to lower his head. Buzz. A stream of true energy surged into King Yu's body. King Yu's pupils constricted as he felt all of the true energy within his body being suppressed by the foreign true energy that was hovering above his dantian. It was as if his true energy was bound by chains and he was completely unable to circulate it. Emperor Changfeng had actually sealed his cultivation. The eyes of the divine dragon silhouette continued to turn and involuntarily fell on the crown prince in the distance. The crown prince's body immediately trembled as his heart was filled with fear. The divine dragon silhouette stared at the crown prince for a long time before letting out a sigh. Without saying anything, it shifted its gaze away. Everyone was dumbfounded. Even the crown prince was dumbfounded. What is the meaning of this? Why is it not even courteous when it sees me? The crown prince was furious. However, he did not dare to say it out loud, so his expression became somewhat comical. All of a sudden, Zhao Mushing, who had been standing beside the crown prince all this while, burst forth with a monstrous amount of true energy. Dazzling golden rays radiated from his body. The eyes of the divine dragon phantom swiveled as it let out a deafening dragon roar. Its finely detailed dragon claws slashed toward Zhao Mushing. Ji Changfeng, I've underestimated you. I didn't expect that you would actually choose to transform into a formation spirit and use it to activate this formation. However, in your current state, you won't be able to hold on for long. Zhao Mushing laughed as he stood with his hands behind his back. In the blink of an eye, he arrived in front of the divine dragon silhouette. He raised his hand, and the pressure of a 7th-grade battle saint instantly spread out. The cultivation technique of the Mahayana island was activated, and Buddhist light shone, as if a golden lotus had bloomed. A Buddhist seal was pushed toward the divine dragon. The dragon claw collided with the sky-engulfing Buddhist seal. An earth-shattering explosion rang out, and Zhao Mushing staggered a few steps back in the air. On the other hand, the divine dragon silhouette dimmed a little, and the coffin that was wrapped in chains swayed a little. Zhao Mushing's eyes lit up. As he had expected, the double calamity dragon head array activated by Ji Changfeng was not the complete version. Then, he let out a long laugh, took a step forward, and appeared at the abdomen of the dragon's head. He ruthlessly smacked down with his palm, causing the divine dragon silhouette to sway and blur. After all, this is not the complete double calamity dragon head array. Zhao Mushing coldly laughed, then spat out a mouthful of blood essence. He exerted a great amount of force and actually pierced through the divine dragon silhouette. An earth-shattering dragon roar rang out, and the divine dragon's silhouette suddenly shattered. The coffin that was wrapped in chains also fell to the ground, emitting a dull thud. Emperor Changfeng, who was sitting cross-legged inside the coffin, slowly retracted his aura and then peacefully lay back down inside the coffin. Zhao Muxing's body swayed for a while, and his complexion became somewhat pale. Taking advantage of the gap in the array and breaking the double calamity dragon head array, which could not last for much longer, he also suffered a significant backlash. However, Zhao Muxing's face did not show the slightest bit of concern. Instead, he was excitedly staring at the bronze coffin. He formed a Buddhist seal with his hand, then with a flick of his mind, 3 glowing specks of light flew out from the coffin. As the light dissipated, the appearances of the 3 objects were revealed. A dazzling golden Buddhist bead sarira, a round and fragrant fruit with 3 cloud patterns on its surface, and a pitch-black bead. These 3 objects were what Zhao Muxing had always wanted. The Buddhist bead sarira was a relic left behind by a warrior of the Mahayana island after he passed away. It was incomparably precious, and the pitch-black bead was a semi-divine tool of the Death Soul Palace, the departed soul orb. As for the fruit, it was a precious 7th-grade spirit fruit, the 3 stripes path understanding fruit. Anyone who consumed it would have a high chance of obtaining enlightenment. If Ji Changfeng wanted to activate the double calamity dragon head array, he would need to rely on the energy provided by many treasures. Among the many treasures, Zhao Muxing only had his eyes on these 3. Originally, Zhao Muxing wanted to support the crown prince as a puppet emperor. However, with Ji Changfeng's actions, all of his plans were thrown into disarray. King Yu had been demoted, and the current crown prince was no match for the 3rd prince who had obtained the support of the Shao family. Simply put, the situation was hopeless. Since the situation was hopeless, he might as well shed all pretense of cordiality and reap some benefits before returning. At the very least, he had to bring back the Buddhist bead sarira. As he held the Buddhist bead sarira, a warm fluctuation enveloped his body, causing the look in Zhao Muxing's eyes to become even more benevolent. With King Yu defeated, the crown prince's momentum was gone. In the end, the battle for the throne still ended with the victory of the 3rd prince. The array enveloping the gate of heavenly mystery gradually dispersed, and its brilliance receded. The heavy snowflakes began to flutter down from the sky once again. "Are you planning to leave just like that?" Xiao Meng indifferently said as he looked at Zhao Muxing, who was planning to leave. Zhao Muxing's identity had already been exposed. It was obvious that the other party was also an expert from a sect. Moreover, he was an extremely powerful expert from the Mahayana island. However, even if he was an expert from the Mahayana island, Xiao Meng would not allow him to leave so easily. "You can't stop me." Zhao Muxing calmly looked at Xiao Meng and indifferently said. The corners of Xiao Meng's mouth curled up. True energy surged out from his body as he said, "How would you know if you don't try?" However, just as the 2 of them were exuding true energy and facing each other with equal harshness, a thin figure slowly walked over. The clear sound of footsteps was extremely obvious in the spacious gate of Heavenly Mystery Plaza. At the very least, the gazes of Zhao Muxing, Xiao Meng, and the rest of the crowd were all attracted by the sound and landed on the figure that was slowly approaching. The expression on Ji Qingshue's face suddenly became somewhat interesting as he looked at that person in disbelief. Xiao Meng also raised his eyebrows as he looked at that person in astonishment. Xiao Yanyu and the Xiao siblings were dumbfounded. "Owner Bu, why is he here?" Xiao Yanyu asked, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Zhao Muxing had a strange expression on his face as he looked at the young man before him, who was merely a 4th-grade battle spirit. Under his gaze, the young man calmly walked up to him and actually waved his hand at him. Then, he expressionlessly opened his mouth to speak. "I'm just passing by. I want to borrow something from you and leave," Bu Fang said as he glanced at Zhao Muxing. Zhao Muxing was dumbfounded. "Borrow? Borrow what?" Then, Bufang raised his arm and pointed at the fruit in Zhao Mushing's hand that had 3 cloud patterns floating above it. He earnestly said, "Yes, the fruit in your hand." Chapter 136. "Here, I just want to borrow the fruit in your hand," Bufang said with a serious expression. At this moment, the gate of heavenly mystery was very quiet. Only the whistling of the cold wind could be heard. Therefore, even though Bufang's voice was not loud, his words were clearly heard by everyone. Xiao Yinyu and Xiao Xiaolong grimaced and did not know whether to laugh or cry. Under such a serious situation, you actually came to borrow a fruit, and a 7th grade spirit fruit at that. Do you really think he's an idiot? Xiao Xiaolong wanted to complain, but when he saw Bufang's serious expression, he felt that words were useless. Owner Bu might really be here to borrow the fruit. Xiao Meng withdrew her true energy and looked at Bufang with a serious expression. Owner Bu actually dared to appear here? Alone? Where is the 9th grade supreme beast and the strange puppet? Did they not come with me? Without the supreme beast and the strange puppet, Bufang might not be a threat. After all, his cultivation level was only at the 4th grade battle spirit level. Almost everyone present could crush him, so where did he get the confidence to borrow the fruit from Zhao Mushing? Zhao Mushing looked at Bufang indifferently. He was not familiar with Bufang and had only heard of him. The black-hearted store owner of the Imperial City? The store owner who had the protection of a 9th grade supreme beast? Zhao Mushing only snorted. What kind of existence was the supreme beast? How could it protect a store? Those people were really boasting too much. Oh? Borrow the fruit in my hand? Based on what? Zhao Mushing said with a faint smile. He raised his hand and the 3 stripes path understanding fruit floated in the air. A rich spiritual energy was dispersing around the path understanding fruit. Bufang was overjoyed at the sight. This 3 stripes path understanding fruit was indeed extraordinary. Could indeed be used as the main ingredient for brewing fine wine. Suppressing the excitement in his heart, Bufang's expression did not change. He glanced at Zhao Mushing and lightly said, "Based on what? I'm not borrowing it from you. Why do you care?" Zhao Mushing froze for a moment. The peaceful expression on his face immediately disappeared, replaced by a feeling of anger and humiliation. The essence of what Bufang had said was correct, because this 3 stripes path understanding fruit should belong to Emperor Changfeng. If Bufang wanted to borrow it, he would be borrowing it from Emperor Changfeng. The fruit is now in my hands. Tell me, why should I give it to you? Zhao Mushing sneered and glanced at Bufang with disdain. He sensed that Bufang was merely a 4th grade battle spirit and said, "With your 4th grade battle spirit cultivation?" Xiao Meng, who was standing at the side, was also a little frightened. Strictly speaking, Bufang could be considered as his benefactor because Bufang's medicinal cuisine saved Ji Ruer. Therefore, he did not want to see Bufang beaten to death by Zhao Mushing out of anger. Because the dog and the puppet weren't here, Xiao Meng really couldn't figure out where Bufang got his courage to confront Zhao Mu. Bufang frowned and looked at Zhao Mushing with a serious expression. "I don't like to fight. However, if necessary, you can also choose to use violence to solve the problem." Then, he raised his hand and the symbol on his wrist suddenly flashed. Green smoke curled up and a pitch-black kitchen knife appeared in his hand. Zhao Mushing was startled, Xiao Meng was startled, and even Ji Qingxue, who had just regained his senses, was dumbfounded. Could one imagine the hilarious feeling of a 4th grade battle spirit holding a kitchen knife while facing a 7th grade battle saint and saying that he should use violence to solve the problem? Outside the gate of heavenly mystery, in the air, An Yen saw this scene and could not help but burst into laughter. Why was Owner Bu so adorable? Looking at Bufang's serious expression as he held the kitchen knife and challenged Zhao Mushing, An Yen felt a burst of joy. She could not understand why Bufang wanted to get involved in the dispute. It turned out that it was for the 3 stripes path understanding fruit, as expected of a chef. He was willing to sacrifice his life for a precious ingredient. Suddenly, Anai Yan's laughter came to an abrupt halt. Her beautiful face was replaced with disbelief. She widened her eyes and looked into the distance. She saw that the double calamity dragon head array, which was destroyed by Zhao Mushing, was once again operating. An even more vigorous and ancient aura surged out from the ground of the imperial palace. This was an aura that was even more terrifying than that of the double calamity dragon head array. What was going on? Anai Yen was dumbfounded. Within the gate of heavenly mystery, everyone was amused by the figure holding the black kitchen knife. A 4th-grade battle spirit challenging a 7th-grade battle saint. Wasn't he courting death? The gap between the two was like a chasm that could not be crossed. Xiao Meng gathered his true energy once again. He was ready to save Bufang at any moment. He could not just watch as his benefactor was killed by Zhao Mushing with a single slap. However, the scene that followed nearly caused everyone's eyeballs to explode. Zhao Mushing was very disdainful of Bufang's provocation. If any 4th-grade battle spirit could challenge a 7th-grade battle saint without the slightest scruple, then where was the dignity of a 7th-grade battle saint? Therefore, Zhao Mushing threw out a palm strike at Bufang. A palm strike filled with true energy was enough to easily kill a 4th-grade battle spirit. That palm strike was light as a feather, as if he was about to squash a fly. Bufang expressionlessly looked at Zhao Mushing. As he watched Zhao Mushing's palm strike, Bufang raised the kitchen knife in his hand. The true energy within his dantian surged and poured into the kitchen knife. The pitch-black kitchen knife immediately underwent a huge transformation. A resplendent golden brilliance burst forth from the kitchen knife. It was extremely dazzling and almost illuminated the entire gate of heavenly mystery. Then, a distant and violent dragon roar resounded from the kitchen knife. Roar! As the dragon roar of the kitchen knife resounded, the entire gate of heavenly mystery trembled. Another distant dragon roar resounded. After slashing away Zhao Mushing's palm strike made from true energy, Bufang rested the gigantic golden dragon bone kitchen knife on his shoulder and suspiciously scanned his surroundings. Why were there two dragon roars? When Zhao Mushing sensed the dragon's roar, his complexion immediately changed. The kitchen knife gave him a huge sense of threat. Furthermore, he could sense that the double calamity dragon head array that was supposed to be dormant seemed to be operating again. How could it be operating again? Wasn't the core of the array Ji Chongfeng's corpse? If the core of the array was destroyed, how could the array still be activated? Zhao Mushing's expression was somewhat ugly as he looked around. He realized that this time, the brilliance of the array was not shining on Ji Chongfeng's coffin. Instead, it was shining on the large kitchen knife in the hands of the young man before him. With the golden dragon bone kitchen knife on his shoulder, Bufang was slightly absent-minded. It was not because he was frightened by the array, but because he suddenly realized that a lot of information had appeared in his mind. It seemed to be the method to control this array. Bufang was a little suspicious. He expressionlessly glanced at the dumbfounded group of people around him. Then, with a thought, he moved according to the method of control. The brilliance of the golden dragon bone kitchen knife became even brighter. Waves of resplendent energy actually burst forth from beneath Bufang's feet. The silhouette of a coiling divine dragon baring its fangs and brandishing its claws soared into the sky. Unlike the divine dragon silhouette that Emperor Chongfeng had transformed into, Bufang's dragon seemed to have a little more spirituality. The divine dragon let out a long roar and then lowered its gigantic head. Under Bufang's control, the dragon's eyes slowly stared at Zhao Mushing. Bufang's heart was at ease. The corners of his mouth twitched as he changed his posture. Carrying the golden dragon bone kitchen knife on his shoulder, he calmly said to Zhao Mushing, "Now, do you still want to use violence to solve the problem?" Chapter 137. Anai Yen stood proudly in the air above the gate of heavenly mystery as she stared dumbfoundedly at Bufang, who had turned into the eye of the array. How could Owner Boo activate the double Calamity Dragon Head array? It didn't make sense at all. The double Calamity Dragon Head array was one of the top 5 array formations in the Celestial Arcanum sect. Not to mention its complexity, just the control method alone was impossible to activate without the system's inheritance. The Light Wind Imperial family also had a record of the control method of this array. Every generation of emperors carefully studied it, which was why Emperor Chongfeng was able to activate it. However, Owner Boo was also able to control this array? Anai Yen had a strange expression on her face. Her eyes widened as she stared at Bufang's figure inside the Gate of Heavenly Mystery. Several pieces of jade appeared in her hand as she fiddled with them. Then, she came to a sudden realization. It was all because of the kitchen knife in Bufang's hand, the kitchen knife that had changed drastically. Anai Yen sucked in a breath of cold air as she exclaimed in her heart. The semi-divine tool, Dragon Bone Kitchen Knife. Furthermore, the dragon bone was no ordinary dragon bone. It could actually cause the array to be guided by the aura of the dragon bone and automatically use the dragon bone kitchen knife as the eye of the array. Thus, the owner of the kitchen knife, Bufang, naturally obtained the right to control this array. Thinking up to this point, Anai Yen did not know what to say. She could only click her tongue in wonder as she envied Bufang, who possessed a semi-divine tool. Zhao Mushing swallowed a mouthful of saliva as he stared at the gigantic divine dragon's head. An enormous dragon's might was released, causing him to feel as if he had fallen into a swamp. He could not understand why the double Calamity Dragon Head array that he had already destroyed would suddenly be awakened. Furthermore, the person controlling it was a young man holding a kitchen knife. Even though he had to admit that the kitchen knife in his hand was somewhat magical. Even though the gigantic kitchen knife had the appearance of a kitchen knife, one look at it would be extremely shocking and cause one's mind to waver. Now, do you still want to use violence to solve the problem? The corners of Bufang's mouth twitched as he asked. The true energy in Zhao Mushing's dantian slowly circulated through his entire body, causing the dragon's might that made it difficult for him to breathe to quietly dissipate. He narrowed his eyes and stared at Bufang. Zhao Mushing was well aware of how difficult it was to obtain a 3 stripes path understanding fruit. As an expert of the Buddhist sect's Mahayana island, he was well aware of the value of a path understanding fruit. It was a spirit fruit that could help a 6th grade battle emperor advance to 7th grade battle saint. He was naturally unwilling to hand it over so easily. Holding the path understanding fruit in one hand, the 3 stripes path understanding fruit slowly rotated under the shroud of dense real energy, emitting a rich fruity fragrance. You're not a member of the Light Wind Empire's imperial family. So what if you manage to awaken the double Calamity Dragon Head array? You don't even know how to activate it, so what can you do to me? Zhao Mushing sneered. He lightly tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and his entire body floated into the air. He stepped on air and prepared to walk out of the formation. Xiaomeng furrowed his brows and was about to make his move. He could not allow Zhao Mushing to take away the 3 treasures. Otherwise, where would the Light Wind Empire put its face? However, just as Xiaomeng was about to make his move, he caught a glimpse of Bufang, who was carrying the kitchen knife, and the corners of his mouth slightly twitched. This expression. Xiaomeng raised his eyebrows and calmed down the surging true energy. It was obvious that Owner Bu would not allow Zhao Mushing to escape so easily. Who said I can't control this formation? Bufang calmly said. Then, he single-handedly grasped the handle of the dragon bone kitchen knife, which seemed to be cast from gold, and fiercely waved it toward Zhao Mushing. With a thought, a dragon's roar resounded. The entire formation emitted a brilliant glow as if it had been awakened in an instant. The divine dragon's phantom claw swiped toward Zhao Mushing, who was walking in the air. Humph! Zhao Mushing coldly snorted. The aura of a 7th grade battle saint was fully released. He single-handedly formed a Buddhist seal and chanted a mysterious Sanskrit chant. Then, behind him, a gigantic Buddha phantom slowly appeared. The secret technique of the Mahayana island, the Arhat's finger. The Buddha phantom pointed a finger toward the dragon claw. The air seemed to be boiling as the two terrifying attacks collided in the air. Then there was no then. Under everyone's dumbfounded gazes, Zhao Mushing's Arhat was directly smashed into pieces by the dragon claw. With a loud bang, it was like a balloon that had been popped. Zhao Mushing violently spat out a mouthful of blood in the air. His body floated to the ground like a withered leaf. The 3 stripes path understanding fruit fell from the sky. It was caught by the divine dragon phantom and delivered into Bu Fang's hands. After receiving the path understanding fruit from the dragon's mouth, Bu Fang felt a wave of dizziness. The true energy within his body was nearly exhausted. The brilliance of the golden dragon bone kitchen knife also dimmed. Then, the gorgeous kitchen knife turned back into a pitch-black one in Bu Fang's hand. Controlling the double calamity dragon head array also consumed Bu Fang's true energy. With Bu Fang's weak true energy of a 4th-grade battle spirit, he could only control the divine dragon phantom for one attack. Bu Fang secretly rejoiced. Fortunately, Zhao Mushing was cooperative and actually chose to meet force with force. If Zhao Mushing did not choose to meet force with force and instead dealt with the divine dragon phantom, Bu Fang might have been exposed in an instant. But who cares? Since the 3 stripes path understanding fruit was already in his hands, he now had the main ingredient for the wine he was about to brew. Bu Fang even thought of the name of the wine. He decided to call it the 3 stripes path understanding wine. Bu Fang thought for a moment and felt that something was wrong. Forget it, he decided to call it that for now. Zhao Mushing spat out a mouthful of blood and staggered. His complexion was sallow and his breathing was weak. He actually fell at the hands of a 4th-grade battle spirit who provoked him with a kitchen knife. He was at a loss. He was remorseful and he began to doubt his own life. However, he was a Buddhist sect expert after all. His state of mind quickly calmed down. When he saw Bu Fang's weak appearance, he came to a realization. This guy could only control the double calamity dragon head array for one attack. After that attack, his true energy would be exhausted and he would become extremely weak. Emperor Chongfeng had to gather so many treasures and the true energy of Battle Saint Lian Fu to control the double calamity dragon head array. How could a mere 4th-grade battle spirit have the capital to do so? Good. Very good. Owner Bu, am I right? I, Zhao Mushing, will remember you. Zhao Mushing steadied his figure and stared at Bu Fang. He smiled and then turned around. He forcefully circulated the true energy in his body and planned to escape from this place. This was not a place he could stay for long. If he did not leave now, he might never be able to leave this place. Old bastard Zhao, where do you think you're going? Xiao Meng's eyes widened as the aura of a 7th-grade battle saint burst forth. He took a step forward and charged toward Zhao Mushing. However, just as he charged into the sky, Zhao Mushing turned around and threw a pitch-black bead at him. The bead seemed to distort the air around it. It possessed a magical power that completely captivated Xiao Meng's mind. Boom! A monstrous soul aura burst forth from within the bead. Countless wails and wails gushed out from within the bead. Xiao Meng's expression changed, and he hurriedly tried to suppress it. If the vengeful spirits and vengeful spirits within the semi-divine tool departed soul orb were to escape, it would definitely be a disaster for the Light Wind Empire. Zhao Mushing made use of this opportunity to quickly escape. The mountains will not change, the rivers will flow forever. Owner Bu, I will personally pay a visit to Owner Bu's store the next time. Zhao Mushing's distant voice rang out, then his figure disappeared. Whoosh! After Zhao Mushing left, the sound of armor clashing rang out from outside the gate of heavenly mystery. A bearded burly man whose entire body was wrapped in bandages and wore a half-body military armor limped into the gate of heavenly mystery. "Your Highness, I have brought my brothers to support you," the bearded burly man roared in a muffled voice. It was rather comical and caused Ji Qingxue to not know whether to laugh or cry. However, seeing that the bearded burly man was not dead, he secretly heaved a sigh of relief. In the distance, Bu Fang kept the dragon-bone kitchen knife and slowly walked toward Ji Qingxue with the 3 stripes path understanding fruit in his arms. Chapter 138. Thank you, Owner Bu, for lending a hand. Ji Qingxue smiled as he cupped his hands at Bu Fang. Looking at Bu Fang's calm expression, he could not help but feel amazed. A 4th-grade battle spirit was actually able to force a 7th-grade battle saint to flee while vomiting blood. Even though it was only because of a magic array, it was still an incredible feat. One had to know that the difference between a 4th-grade battle spirit and a 7th-grade battle saint was like a natural chasm that was basically insurmountable. Owner Bu, as expected, is mysterious. His identity is definitely not simple. Bu Fang gave Ji Qingxue a glance and was stunned for a moment. Then, he waved his hand at the 3 stripes path understanding fruit in his hand and said, "This fruit, can you give it to me?" Bu Fang seriously gazed at Ji Qingxue. He believed that the latter would not say no. This path understanding fruit was very precious. However, Bu Fang had once used the phoenix blood herb to save Ji Qingxue. The value of the phoenix blood herb was not any less than the path understanding fruit. Furthermore, Ji Qingxue would probably not ask for it back even if he treated it as a life-saving favor. Emperor Chongfeng was already in hibernation and King Yu was also punished by Emperor Chongfeng. The crown prince had lost his power and Ji Qingxue had the emperor's posthumous edict with him. Now, he was definitely the person who would ascend to the throne. In other words, Ji Qingxue was already confirmed to be the new emperor of the Light Wind Empire. Giving it to Owner Bu is not a problem, Ji Qingxue solemnly said to Bu Fang. Then, Bu Fang joyfully nodded his head and patted Ji Qingxue's shoulder. As expected, I didn't save you for nothing. Emperor Chongfeng's coffin was once again closed. The 8 naked battle kings once again carried the coffin and walked out of the majestic gate of heavenly mystery along the main road of the gate of heavenly mystery. Stepping onto the imperial city's long street, the citizens were all standing on both sides of the street and silently looking at the simple bronze coffin. Their silence was filled with mourning and respect. Emperor Chongfeng, an emperor throughout the ages, was indeed worthy of everyone's respect. The snow that filled the sky seemed to have turned into withered petals that fluttered in the air. It was as if they were accompanying the elegy of a court musician, playing a heavy movement. The funeral procession traveled far and wide. Both sides of the street were lined with people. Some had red and swollen eyes, while others knelt in the cold weather to send them off. One could not help but sigh at this scene. Ji Qingxue's gaze was resolute. Every action of the people tugged at his heart, causing him to be greatly shaken. It turned out that the serious and dignified father in his eyes was actually loved and respected by so many people. This was what a monarch was, this was what an empire's emperor was like. He also wanted to be such an emperor. Bu Fang returned to the store and collapsed onto a chair. He did not want to move at all. Activating the double calamity dragon head array had completely exhausted the true energy within his dantian. It was as if he had starved for 3 days and 3 nights. However, even though he had suffered so much, Bu Fang was still very satisfied. It was not because of anything else but because he had obtained the 3 stripes path understanding fruit. That was a 7th-grade spirit fruit, a priceless treasure. It was the main ingredient of the fine wine he was about to brew. As he took out the path understanding fruit, a rich fragrance filled the air. There were 3 cloud patterns on it that resembled floating white clouds, swaying in Bu Fang's eyes. The cloud patterns seemed to be emitting a strange fragrance. Once the fragrance entered his nostrils, it made Bufang feel that the dried-up energy vortex within his body suddenly sped up. It was said that the path-understanding fruit had a high chance of allowing a 6th-grade battle emperor to obtain the opportunity to advance to 7th-grade battle saint. That was why it was so precious. Dragging his exhausted body up, Bufang went to the kitchen. He opened the cupboard and placed the remaining half of the phoenix blood herb from the system's dimensional storage into the cupboard. He also placed the 3 stripes path-understanding fruit beside the phoenix blood herb. This cupboard was provided by the system. It had excellent fresh-keeping properties and could also prevent spirit energy from escaping. It was very suitable for storing these spirit herbs. After stretching his body, Bufang washed his palms. After washing away the dirt and grime, he rolled up his sleeves and began to prepare to cook. The spirit energy within his body had been exhausted. It was as if he had been starving for a long time. If he did not cook something to fill his stomach, he felt that he would definitely not be able to get out of bed the next day. He lit the fire and turned on the stove. Even though Bufang was exhausted, when it came to culinary skills, he became meticulous. His movements were smooth and fluid, and he completed all the preparation tasks like moving clouds and flowing water. The melodious and rhythmic sound of stir-frying echoed in the kitchen. Not long after, a rich fragrance wafted out from the kitchen, causing one's mouth to involuntarily salivate and their stomach to rumble. Soon, a plate of steaming hot egg-fried rice that seemed to have been poured with golden juice was placed on the table. Bufang wiped away the water stains on his hands and sat on the stool. He let out a long breath and looked at the exquisite egg-fried rice in front of him that was like a work of art. His face was filled with satisfaction and satisfaction. Delicacies were meant to make people happy, and being able to cook delicacies that could make people happy was an even more blissful thing. After Bufang was intoxicated, he impatiently began to eat. Using a blue and white porcelain spoon, he scooped up a spoonful of egg-fried rice. When the egg liquid was pulled out, it was like a silk thread. The rich fragrance of the egg mixed with the fragrance of the rice burst forth like a bomb and instantly enveloped Bufang's nose. No matter how many times I eat this egg-fried rice, I will never get tired of it. Bufang sighed in his heart. A plate of egg-fried rice was nothing to the hungry Bufang. After he finished eating, Bufang felt warm all over and there seemed to be true energy circulating within his lower abdomen. The dried-up true energy vortex also began to flourish after digesting the spirit energy from the egg-fried rice. I've finally recovered. The corners of Bufang's mouth twitched. Then, he cleaned up the dishes and returned to the second floor of the kitchen. After taking a bath, he happily crawled into bed and began to sleep. At this moment, night had already fallen. 2 crescent moons hung in the night sky, resonating with each other and sprinkling down a cold moonlight. Emperor Chongfeng was buried. The new emperor, Ji Qingxue, guarded the mausoleum for 3 days before finally returning to the imperial court. King Yu, Ji Qingyu, was stripped of his royal status and his cultivation was sealed. He was ordered to guard the imperial mausoleum for 3 years and was not allowed to leave. Ji Qingyu went from high-spirited and vigorous to downtrodden in an instant. People could not help but sigh. After Ji Qingxue ascended to the throne, the crown prince, Ji Qinggan, was given the title of unfettered king. He was not allowed to control the military nor was he allowed to meddle in the affairs of the imperial court. Perhaps this was the best ending for Ji Qinggan. After the new emperor ascended to the throne, the Light Wind Empire was in full swing. In the days following Emperor Chongfeng's death, the entire imperial court seemed to have fallen into chaos and paralysis. Chief eunuch Lian Fu did not return to the imperial city. Instead, he stayed in the imperial mausoleum and continued to guard Emperor Chongfeng's mausoleum. According to Lian Fu's wish, he wanted to guard the mausoleum for the rest of his life until his life dried up. This determination made Ji Qingxue fall into silence and respect. That was why he did not summon Lian Fu back. For Ji Qingxue, the biggest inconvenience of becoming the emperor was that he could not go to Owner Bu's store every day to drink and eat meat. He could not even drink his favorite red braised pork and Iceheart jade urn wine because he had to deal with a thick stack of government affairs and did not have the time to leave the imperial palace. Furthermore, only the oyster pancake could be taken out of Bu Feng's store. The other dishes could not be taken out. Eating the oyster pancake every day would cause one's internal heat. That was why Ji Qingxue craved it. Time passed by. Under the efforts of Ji Qingxue and the many ministers, the Light Wind Empire finally recovered. Some order was restored and everything was in order. Everything was a scene of prosperity. In the days of heavy snow, the spring festival of the Light Wind Empire was quietly approaching. Chapter 139. The Spring Festival was a traditional festival that had been passed down since the founding of the Light Wind Empire. It was the most joyous day of the year in the empire. On this day, every household would sum up their achievements in the past year and celebrate the beginning of the new year, hoping for good weather in the coming year. In short, it was a day of celebration for the entire empire. In the majestic imperial palace, the golden bricks and jade tiles were faintly discernible under the cover of the rustling wind and snow. In the main hall, hundreds of officials stood in great numbers, all of them respectfully facing the new emperor, Ji Qingxue, who was sitting on the golden dragon throne. Ji Qingxue was wearing a golden dragon robe and a golden crown on his head. His expression was solemn as he sat high up on the throne. The majesty of an emperor was on full display, and he somewhat resembled Emperor Changfeng. A minister stepped forward, bowed toward Ji Qingxue and said, "Your Majesty, tomorrow is the Spring Festival and coincides with your ascension to the throne. Should we expand the scale of this year's 100 Family Banquet?" 100 Family Banquet? Ji Qingxue pondered for a moment and understood. The 100 Family Banquet had its origins. It was an event held by the Light Wind Empire's imperial family on the day of the Spring Festival to celebrate the Spring Festival. 100 tables would be set up in the gate of Heavenly Mystery Square, and all of the famous chefs in the imperial city would gather at the gate of Heavenly Mystery to cook their signature dishes for the 100 households who were lucky enough to be selected to taste. This was also the most popular event of the Spring Festival because it included all of the imperial city's chefs and, of course, the imperial chef. Being able to taste the dishes of the imperial chefs was something that ordinary people did not even dare to dream about. Ordinary people basically did not have the qualifications or the opportunity to taste the dishes of the imperial chef. Only on the day of the Spring Festival could they taste dishes that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. The purpose of the Light Wind Empire's imperial family holding this event was to reward the citizens who had worked hard for a year so that they could live a peaceful life under the protection of the empire. This was a good thing for the citizens and also for the Light Wind Empire. It was a rare opportunity for all the chefs in the imperial city. The 100 Family Banquet was a place for them to display their skills because the emperor would personally be there to taste their dishes. If they caught the emperor's eye, they might even be able to become a chef in the imperial kitchen. That would be something that would bring glory to their ancestors. Ji Qingxue nodded and looked toward the minister with interest as he asked, "Expand the scale? How do we expand it?" That official's face immediately lit up with joy. When the three princes were fighting for the throne, he had sided with the crown prince. But now that the crown prince had lost his power and was made a mere figurehead, as an official, he naturally had to be fearful, afraid that he would do something wrong and be demoted by Ji Qingxue. Although the current situation in the imperial court was great, every minister was worried. After all, His Majesty wanted to nurture his own power, so he had to get rid of some of the older ministers. During this period of time, he had already seen many ministers being demoted. A few days ago, this humble subject has already sent out orders to the various authorities, ordering them to select 3 top chefs from all over the Light Wind Empire to enter the capital to cook for this year's 100 Family Banquet. The scale of the 100 Family Banquet has also been expanded from the original 100 to 300. The number of lucky households has also been expanded from 100 to 300, which just happens to be within the limits of the Gate of Heavenly Mystery. Moreover, there will be a selection for the best chef. If the chef's dish obtains the most votes from the citizens, he will be able to obtain the title of the best chef and receive a reward. The minister said respectfully. As soon as he revealed his plan, the entire imperial court was in an uproar. Everyone was whispering to each other. This was a bold plan. It also meant that this minister was ready to go all out and go all out. Ji Qingxue narrowed his eyes and pondered for a moment. The corners of his mouth curled up and he nodded. This was a pretty good plan. He had just ascended to the throne and his popularity among the citizens was still not stable. If he could have this kind of activity to build up his image in the hearts of the citizens, it would not be a bad idea. However, a cooking competition between chefs. As Ji Qingxue thought of this, the figure of Bu Fang involuntarily appeared in his mind. His expression became a little strange. If he could convince Owner Bu to participate in this year's 100 Family Banquet, then this year's 100 Family Banquet would definitely be very exciting. With Owner Bu's culinary skills, he would definitely be able to conquer the taste buds of 300 households. Thus, Ji Qingxue turned to the rather pleased minister and asked, "This is a good idea. Let me ask you, did you invite Owner Bu to participate? Or did Owner Bu agree to participate?" The minister was taken aback for a moment. Then, his expression slightly changed and became somewhat unsightly. "Your Majesty, black-hearted, of Fong Fong's little store, I also sent someone to invite him, but—" The minister's expression seemed to be a little strange, but he hesitated and found it difficult to speak. Ji Qingxue was immediately curious and asked, "What happened? What was the result?" "The person I sent to invite him came back naked." Owner Bu did not agree. The minister stammered as if he found it a little difficult to speak of the matter. As soon as these words came out, all the ministers in the imperial court looked at each other in dismay. Returned naked? Could it be that he was stripped naked? Ha 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 ha. Owner Bu is still Owner Bu. If I'm not mistaken, the person you sent must be arrogant and doesn't know Owner Bu's temperament. Ji Qingxue could not help but burst into laughter when he heard the minister's report. All the ministers in the imperial court had a strange expression on their faces. What was His Majesty laughing at? Laughing at streaking? Could it be that His Majesty liked to see people streaking? The minister was drenched in a cold sweat as he nodded and said, "The person I sent is indeed quite arrogant, but stripping people naked in Fong Fong's little store is indeed unbecoming. All right, I know what you want to say. You don't have to send anyone else. You don't have to worry about the matter of inviting Owner Bu to the 100 Family Banquet." Ji Qingxue waved his hand and said. Then, he turned his gaze toward the drowsy great General Ouyang Zongheng. "General Ouyang, you should personally make a move to invite Owner Bu. What do you think?" Ji Qingxue simply said. Ouyang Zongheng immediately staggered and woke up from his sleep. His beard was still stained with shiny saliva as he said with a dumbfounded expression, "Which thief do I need to capture? Your Majesty, tell me. I will not back down even half a step." Looking at his comical appearance, all the ministers in the imperial court could not help but laugh. "General, isn't Xiaoyi a waitress at Fong Fong's little store? I'll leave the matter of inviting Owner Bu to the 100 Family Banquet to you," Ji Qingxue said with a chuckle. Then, he no longer paid any attention to the dumbfounded General Ouyang and left the imperial court. The cold wind rustled and snowflakes fluttered down. After Bu Fong finished cooking Fatty Jin's dish, he was once again free. He walked to the entrance and leaned against a chair, leisurely and contentedly sitting there with a cup of steaming hot water in his hand. The water was provided by the system and was boiled with Heaven Alps spirit spring water. It contained a light amount of spirit energy and was sweet and refreshing. After lightly taking a sip of the water, Bufang exhaled with a satisfied expression on his face. Suddenly, the water in his cup rippled and dissipated in circles. A slight vibration came from the alleyway. Bufang puzzledly raised his head and saw a large group of figures in the distance. Ouyang Xiaoyi was skipping at the very front. Behind her were her three brothers who were like savage beasts. Around the three barbarians of Ouyang, there was another group of people, both men and women. They were densely packed together. Bufang expressionlessly watched as the group of people majestically rushed toward the store. What's going on? Xiaoyi came to work, and she even brought her family along? Chapter 140. Dong dong dong. The ground trembled as if a giant beast had trampled over it. The three barbarians of Ouyang appeared in front of Bufang with their enormous bodies. Make way for your father. Who told you to stand so tightly? An exasperated shout sounded out from behind the three barbarians of Ouyang. Then, Ouyang Zhen and Ouyang Wu awkwardly scratched the back of their heads and took a small step to the side. A figure squeezed through the gap between the two of them. You bunch of brats, have you been eating too much every day and have not digested? Look at how fat you are. When we get back, increase your training intensity by 3 times. Ouyang Zongheng's face darkened. He raised his finger and pointed at the three barbarians of Ouyang as he berated them. His spittle almost sprayed all over their faces. The three barbarians of Ouyang wiped their faces and awkwardly smiled. However, when they heard that their training intensity had to be increased by 3 times, their faces immediately darkened and they were speechless. How could they get fat with their bodies? They had already trained to the point where only muscles remained. Dad, what are you doing? The smelly boss is looking at you. Ouyang Xiaoyi's dissatisfied voice rang out. Ouyang Zongheng's expression immediately changed 180 degrees as he moved closer to Ouyang Xiaoyi with a face full of smiles. Hey, my good daughter, isn't your father teaching your brothers manners? Your father will remember everything you said before. Seeing Ouyang Zongheng continuously nodding his head, Ouyang Xiaoyi snorted and looked at Bufang. She giggled and said, Smelly boss, let me introduce you. This is my dad, the great general of the empire. He is as powerful as Uncle Xiao. After Ouyang Xiaoyi introduced Ouyang Zongheng's expression immediately turned solemn. He straightened his chest and nodded at Bufang with his head held high. Bufang expressionlessly looked at him. He raised the steaming cup in his hand and took a sip of the water. He softly replied with an "Oh." Ouyang Zongheng's expression immediately stiffened. This brat was indeed as arrogant as the rumors said. This is my first mother, second mother, third mother, sixth mother. Ouyang Xiaoyi said to Bufang as she pulled over a noblewoman with luxurious makeup. Looking at her smiling face, Bufang pursed his lips and nodded at these noblewomen. These are my 3 foolish brothers. There's no need for introductions. As for the 3 barbarians of Ouyang, Ouyang Xiaoyi still chose to skip over them, because Bufang was actually not unfamiliar with them. Owner Bu. The 3 barbarians of Ouyang solemnly cupped their fists and greeted Bufang. Bufang stood up from his chair, nodded, and gestured for them to enter the store. The cold wind was howling outside, and it was not suitable for them to stay for long. Xiaoyi, why did you bring so many people here? Bufang asked curiously. Dad said he has something to discuss with you. As for us, we're just here to eat delicious food. Dad said he'll treat us. Ouyang Xiaoyi said excitedly. Her cheeks were rosy and her gem-like eyes were blinking. She looked extremely adorable. Treat. Bufang was stunned for a moment. Then, he looked at Ouyang Zongheng with a strange expression. Could he afford it? Then come in and see what you want. The menu is on the wall behind you. Xiao-yi, you'll accompany your parents today, Bufang said indifferently and then walked toward the kitchen. Ouyang Zongheng looked at Bufang's back and hesitated to speak. After thinking for a while, he sighed. Forget it, let's talk after we finish eating. Let's have a taste first and see if it's as delicious as the rumors say and if it's worthy of me personally treating him. When Ouyang Zongheng turned his head to look, he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. He suddenly remembered that the dishes in this black-hearted store were ridiculously expensive. Did he have a screw loose or something? Why did he agree to treat Xiaoyi? Looking at the rows of dishes marked with crystals, Great General Ouyang's heart was dripping blood, and his hands were somewhat trembling. This group of women, please go easy on me. This old man only has so little money left in his private stash. Xiao-yi, which dish do you think is the best? The aunt moved closer to Ouyang Xiaoyi and asked with a smile. Ouyang Xiaoyi pointed. Sweet and sour ribs. Ouyang Zongheng's lips trembled and his nostrils flared. He felt as if his heart was being torn apart by Ouyang Xiaoyi with a dagger in her hand. 50 crystals were gone just like that. Xiao-yi, tell me, which dish is the most delicious? The second mother pinched Ouyang Xiaoyi's rosy cheeks and asked with a smile. Ouyang Xiaoyi pointed. Red braised meat. The corner of Ouyang Zongheng's mouth twitched, and he almost vomited blood. Red braised meat. 1 serving costs 100 crystals. This girl, why did she only pick the expensive dishes? Can she not cheat me like this? The remaining aunts also came over one after another and asked Ouyang Xiaoyi to recommend dishes. Ouyang Xiaoyi raised her nose and pointed at the menu as she recommended the most expensive dishes. Ouyang Zongheng had already collapsed into his chair. The gaze he used to look at Ouyang Xiaoyi was filled with despair. She was going to eat up all of his private stash of money. Dad? Aren't you going to order? Ouyang Xiaoyi asked sweetly as she puzzledly looked at Ouyang Zongheng, who was looking at her with a face full of resentment. Then, her eyes narrowed like cute crescent moons as she said with a smile, Do you want me to order for you? No, give me a serving. Dry mixed noodles will do. Dad is not picky. Ouyang Zongheng quickly sat up and seriously said. The 3 barbarians of Ouyang had a simpler order. They ordered a serving of Li's fish and a jar of Ice Heart Jade Urn wine. When Ouyang Xiaoyi happily told Bufang about the dishes she ordered, even Bufang was slightly surprised. He glanced at Ouyang Zongheng, who was sitting up straight in the distance, and thought to himself, What a tycoon! After a while, a rich aroma began to drift out from the kitchen. The aroma caused Ouyang Zongheng and the others, who were visiting Bufang's store for the first time, to be extremely intoxicated. Ouyang Zongheng's wives were already extremely excited by the aroma. As the saying went, in order to capture a woman's heart, one must first capture her stomach. Before Bufang's dish was even served, the aroma alone was enough to make Ouyang Zongheng's wives unable to stop themselves. This is your sweet and sour ribs, please enjoy. Bufang did not ask Ouyang Xiaoyi to serve the dish. Instead, he slowly walked out of the kitchen with a blue and white porcelain plate in hand and placed the sweet and sour ribs in front of Xiaoyi's aunt. The aunt was already completely attracted by the sweet and sour ribs. The orange-red sweet and sour ribs seemed to possess some kind of magic, causing the aunt to continuously swallow her saliva. All of her previous reservations were thrown away. After a piece of sweet and sour ribs entered her mouth, the aunt was completely intoxicated by the aroma of the meat. Ouyang Zongheng was gluttonous as he looked at the dish. He could not help but stretch out his head to look at the sweet and sour ribs. He reached out his hand to grab a piece and put it into his mouth. Slap! Who told you to touch my sweet and sour ribs? If you want to eat it, go ahead and order it yourself. Look at yourself. The aunt waved her hand and slapped away Ouyang Zongheng's hand that was secretly reaching out. Her face was filled with anger. Then, she hugged the sweet and sour ribs tightly in her arms as if she was protecting a child. Ouyang Zongheng was expressionless. What do you mean order it myself? If I still had money, I would definitely order 2 plates. I'll eat 1 plate and feed the other plate to the dogs. After that, Bufang continued to serve the dishes. The aroma of the dishes permeated the air, and completely refreshed Ouyang Zongheng's sense of taste. How could there be such delicious food in this world? It was a pity that he could only smell it. Finally, it was his dish's turn. Ouyang Zongheng felt as if 2 streams of tears were about to flow down his cheeks. His heart was extremely sour. Your dry mixed noodles, please enjoy, Bufang lightly said. Ouyang Zongheng was expressionless as he looked at the bowl of completely dry noodles in front of him. Chapter 141. Slurp. Ouyang Zongheng wiped his beard as he used his chopsticks to pick up a few strands of dry mixed noodles and sent them into his mouth. Even though this dry mixed noodles looked a lot shabbier than red braised meat and sweet and sour ribs, at least he had paid for it. Oh! Once it entered his mouth, a rich fragrance burst forth, causing Ouyang Zongheng's eyes to immediately widen. He subconsciously exerted force in his mouth, and with a slurping sound, he abruptly sucked in the noodles. The oily juice splattered in all directions as the fragrance overflowed. Even though the fragrance of the dry mixed noodles was not as rich as the egg-fried rice or as alluring as the red braised meat, it was this faint fragrance that made it all the more alluring. Ouyang Zongheng could not stop once he started sucking in the noodles. The sound of Ouyang Zongheng slurping instantly resounded throughout the store. Ouyang Xiaoyi happily took a sip of the fish head tofu soup. The mellow taste of the fish soup spread out on the tip of her tongue, and she was completely intoxicated by it. It was as if she had turned into a fish and was freely swimming in a milky white ocean. Occasionally, she would pull off a piece of coral made of tofu and happily eat it. Slurp. The sound of slurping noodles rang out, and Ouyang Xiaoyi's beautiful intoxication was mercilessly shattered. The anger of suddenly being pulled back from her fantasy made her turn her head angrily and look at her father, who was slurping on a few noodles beside her. Can't you lower your voice while eating noodles? You're interrupting my fish soup. Smelly dad. Ouyang Xiaoyi pouted as she angrily complained. Cough, cough, cough. Ouyang Zongheng's eyes widened and the sound of slurping noodles immediately came to an abrupt halt. Then, his entire face flushed red as he directly covered his mouth and started coughing. All right, this fellow ate too hastily and choked on his noodles. Ouyang Zongheng's eyes widened as he snatched the cup of ice-heart jade urn wine that Ouyang Zhen was about to bring to his mouth, and gulped it down in one gulp. He immediately felt a sense of comfort. Ha! Awesome! Ouyang Zongheng stroked his beard and said in a satisfied manner. Suddenly, he smacked his lips and his nose abruptly widened. What the heck? What is this smell? Wine. Such fragrant wine. Ouyang Zongheng glanced at the celadon cup in his hand, then looked at Ouyang Di, who was holding a wine jar and pouring wine into his cup, and grinned. Brat, hurry up and fill up your father's bowl. How could you not invite your father for such a fine wine? Damn it, double the training when we get back. The 3 Ouyang brothers were speechless. Ouyang Xiaoyi. Slurp. Ouyang Zongheng drank a cup of ice-heart jade urn wine and continued his noodle-sucking journey. After eating and drinking to their heart's content, the entire Ouyang family happily slumped on their chairs. Eating and drinking to their heart's content was the most relaxing moment. The satisfaction they felt after tasting delicious food made them want to laugh out loud. Bufang wiped off the water stains on his hands and walked out of the kitchen. Looking at the lazy family, the corners of his mouth twitched. A total of 320 crystals and 100 gold coins. Thank you for your patronage, Bufang said to Ouyang Zongheng, who was sitting at the side and patting his stomach. Ouyang Zongheng, who was patting his stomach, suddenly froze. He felt as if the whole world had darkened. 320 crystals, how can you girls eat so much? Under Ouyang Zongheng's extremely reluctant gaze, Bufang put away the crystals and gold coins and dusted his hands. Bufang was also very satisfied. After he finished collecting the gold coins, the system's serious voice rang out in his mind. Congratulations to the host for achieving a turnover of 20,000 crystals. You have completed the short-term goal and will soon receive the system reward. The system reward is being released. Bu Fang was startled for a moment. Then, the corners of his mouth curled up and he let out a long breath. It turned out that he had already achieved a turnover of 20,000 crystals without realizing it. It was not easy at all. Achieving a turnover of 20,000 crystals meant that he could obtain an amount of true energy equivalent to 10,000 crystals. This meant that his cultivation had finally advanced from Battle Spirit to Battle King. I am finally a man who can be called a Battle King, Bu Fang happily thought to himself. Just as he was about to check the system reward, Ouyang Zongheng suddenly moved closer to him. He was so close that Bu Fang could even smell the oily smell from the dry mixed noodles on his body. Bu Fang could not help but furrow his brows. He took a step back and indifferently looked at Ouyang Zongheng. If you have something to say, just say it. Don't come so close to me, Bu Fang expressionlessly said. Ouyang Zongheng's movements immediately froze. He awkwardly smiled and patted his body as he said to Bu Fang, "Owner Bu, it's like this. The reason I came here today is actually because I have an important matter to discuss with you." "Speak," Bu Fang said. "Look, Owner Bu's culinary skills are so good that no words can describe its deliciousness. Owner Bu wouldn't wish for the delicacies you personally cooked to be hidden in this store and ignored, right? That would be an insult to Owner Bu's culinary skills," Ouyang Zongheng said as he stroked his beard. Bu Fang indifferently looked at him and signaled for him to continue. "Owner Bu should know about the Spring Festival. Tomorrow is the Spring Festival, and on the second day, the Imperial City will host the 100 Family Banquet. At that time, all the famous chefs in the Light Wind Empire will come from all over the country to cook for the 100 Family Banquet in the Gate of Heavenly Mystery. This is the perfect time to let everyone know about Owner Bu's culinary skills," Ouyang Zongheng said with a smile as he stared at Bu Fang with glowing eyes. "So, Owner Bu won't consider participating? Spring Festival." Bu Fang narrowed his eyes. He recalled the few petty officials who arrogantly came to his store to cause trouble a few days ago. It seemed like they also wanted him to participate in some 100 Family Banquet. "I don't care what 100 Family Banquet it is. Coming to the store to cause trouble is your fault." So, Bu Fang asked Xiao Bai to strip those petty officials and throw them out. Bu Fang had almost forgotten about this matter. Now that Ouyang Zongheng brought it up, he suddenly remembered. This 100 Family Banquet sounds very impressive. Bu Fang nodded as he looked at Ouyang Zongheng. "Not participating, not interested," Bu Fang indifferently said. "Ah? What? Not participating? Why?" Ouyang Zongheng's expression stiffened and he immediately asked in confusion. In his opinion, a chef participating in the 100 Family Banquet was as important as a scholar participating in the imperial examinations. As a chef, Bu Fang was actually not participating in the Empire's 100 Family Banquet. This was simply unreasonable. Troublesome. 100 Family Banquet, 100 Family Banquet. It sounds like a troublesome matter. I just want to quietly stay in the store and cook delicacies. If they come, I welcome them, Bu Fang seriously and sincerely said. These were indeed his thoughts. He was a person who was afraid of trouble. His wish was to hold a cup of hot tea, sit at the entrance of the store, and watch the world change and the flowers bloom and wilt. It was that simple. "Owner Bu, there will be a selection for the chefs in this 100 Family Banquet. The person who gets first place in the customers' votes will receive a reward from the Empire. Don't you want to know what the reward is?" Ouyang Zongheng stared at Bu Fang and said, "Reward?" The Empire's 3 stripes path understanding fruit had already been taken away by him. What other reward could there be that could pique his interest? Abrupt Mission 2. The host must participate in the 100-family banquet held by the Light Wind Empire and obtain first place in the customer's comment. The host will receive a reward from the Empire. Crush everything, young man. Mission reward. Recipe for spirit turtle egg tart. Bufang sighed in his heart. He was afraid of trouble, but sometimes the system would be very humane and suggest troublesome abrupt missions. Chapter 142. Do you think a mere reward is enough to convince me to participate in the competition? Bufang stood ramrod straight and looked at Ouyang Zongheng with a serious expression. Ouyang Zongheng's heart trembled, as expected of a chef recognized by His Majesty. His strength of character was indeed not something any chef could compare to. It seemed like it would be extremely difficult to invite Owner Bu to participate this time. Owner Bu, are you really not going to think about it? This is the time to showcase Owner Bu's culinary skills. Ouyang Zongheng said unwillingly. Bufang looked at him, blinked, and let out a light breath. Then, he said, "First, tell me what the prize for first place is." What? Ouyang Zongheng's eyes widened and he looked at Bufang with a grin. You're giving in just like that? Didn't you say you wouldn't be moved? Didn't you say you were of noble character and unquestionable integrity, and that you wouldn't be moved by gifts? Cough cough. Owner Bu, it's like this. The prize for the 100-family banquet this time was personally chosen by His Majesty from the Imperial Palace's treasury. The prize will only be announced when the champion is chosen at the end, so this old man is not too sure at this moment. However, this old man dares to guarantee with my character that the prize this time will definitely not disappoint Owner Bu. Ouyang Zongheng's nostrils slightly flared as he patted his chest and vowed. Bufang slightly lowered his gaze and pretended to be in deep thought. Then, he raised his head and said to Ouyang Zongheng, "All right, I agree to participate." Hearing that Bufang actually agreed to participate in the 100-family banquet, Ouyang Zongheng's face immediately bloomed like a chrysanthemum, bright and resplendent. Oh my, if Owner Bu participates, he definitely won't be able to escape first place. TSK. Owner Bu's dishes are the most delicious dishes I've ever tasted. They're even more delicious than the dishes cooked by the imperial chefs in the Imperial Palace. There's only one word to describe them: great. Ouyang Zongheng gave Bufang a thumbs up and compliments poured out of his mouth, as if they were free. If others saw this scene, they would never have thought that this uncle who looked like a marketer was actually a famous general of the empire. Ouyang Zongheng heaved a long sigh of relief. His heart was at ease. Since Owner Bu had already promised him, then he had completed the task that His Majesty had given him. Although the process made his heart ache so much that he couldn't breathe, the result was very satisfying. Although his secret stash of money for a few months had been dug out by his deceptive daughter, Bufang watched as the Ouyang family left, then turned around and returned to the kitchen. Bufang was a person who was afraid of trouble, but he was also a serious person. He had always been serious when it came to food. If he didn't want to do it, then he wouldn't do it. Since he had chosen to do it, then he would do it to the best. Since he had chosen to participate in the 100-family banquet this time around, he definitely had to prepare well and obtain the first place. As the spring festival approached, the streets and alleys of the imperial city became extremely lively and busy. Everyone was cleaning up their houses, putting up red couplets, and cooking delicacies in preparation for the upcoming new year. On the 10-mile-long street, the vendors who had set up their stalls had already packed up their stalls. Their faces were filled with impatient joy as they eagerly returned home to celebrate the spring festival with their loved ones. Wisps of smoke rose into the air and rose straight into the sky before being scattered by the wind. As night fell, 2 bright moons hung high up in the night sky like 2 round silver plates. The usually cold moonlight seemed to have become warm as it shone on the streets, giving off a faint fluorescent glow. On the street, many children were carrying lanterns and wearing thick cotton clothes. They were breathing heavily, and their little faces were flushed. They were playing around, and the sound of their laughter broke the silence of the night, bringing with it the joy of a festival. Large red lanterns were hung in front of the doors of the wealthy families. Housekeepers and maids were all busily preparing the necessities for the festival. The kitchen was bustling with activity. The sound of stir-frying resounded incessantly, and the fragrance of the dishes lingered in the air, lingering in the air and lingering in the air. Plate after plate of exquisite dishes were cooked and placed on the dining table. Many of the descendants of the wealthy families sat in a circle and happily enjoyed their reunion dinner. The atmosphere of the spring festival was rich and high. Inside Fong Fong's little store, Bu Fong pushed open the door and walked out. The alleyway was quiet and cold. Even the moonlight that was warmer than usual was unable to disperse the emptiness in the alleyway. He pulled over a stool and sat at the entrance of the store. Even though the store was not open for business, he was still curled up in the alleyway. As the cold wind whistled past and slapped against his cheeks, he could not help but shrink his neck. The cold moonlight shone down on the entrance of the store. A person, a chair, and a dog seemed to be incompatible with the festive atmosphere outside the alleyway. Boom! A firework soared into the sky and bloomed in the pitch-black night sky. It was so beautiful that it was enchanting. Phew, so beautiful, Bu Fong thought to himself. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps came from the alleyway. Bu Fong puzzledly looked toward the entrance of the alleyway and saw 3 figures slowly approaching. Xiao Yinyu and Xiao Xiaolong were dragging the bouncing Ouyang Xiaoi along as they approached. Tonight, Xiao Yinyu was not wearing a veil and her beautiful face was exposed to the air. Her creamy skin seemed to be faintly glowing under the illumination of the moonlight. "Smelly boss, we're here to bring you food," Ouyang Xiaoi said with a smile. Xiao Yinyu still had the elegance of a young lady from a wealthy family. She was wearing a silk dress as she walked over. She was holding a lunchbox in her hand and had a faint smile on her face. TSK, Owner Bu, are you admiring the fireworks? How leisurely and elegant. But I have to say, this is the best angle for you to see the fireworks, Xiao Xiaolong said with a smile as he pulled out a few chairs from the store and placed them at the entrance. He then sat beside Bu Fong. Bu Fong was a little dazed and looked at the 3 of them in confusion. What are they doing? Are they here to bring me food? Xiao Yinyu smiled gently and said, "Tomorrow is the spring festival and tonight is the time for reunion dinner. We noticed that Owner Bu seems to be alone and thought that he might be a little lonely, so we brought you some food. These pastries were personally made by my mother. She said that she wanted to thank Owner Bu for his kindness." As she spoke, Xiao Yinyu sat on the chair in a dignified manner and placed the lunchbox in front of Bu Fong. When the lid of the lunchbox was opened, a faint fragrance immediately assailed his nostrils. Even though it was not as fragrant as Bu Fong's dishes, this refreshing fragrance was still quite enjoyable. Stacks of exquisite pastries were taken out from the lunchbox. They were extremely pleasing to the eye. "Come and have a taste. These were personally made by my mother." Xiao Yinyu held up a plate of pastries and looked at Bu Fong with a smile on her face. Bu Fong gave the 3 of them a serious look. His heart warmed up and the corners of his mouth slightly curled up. He picked up a piece of pastry and took a bite. His eyes immediately lit up. The taste of the pastry was excellent. Even though it was sweet, it was not greasy. Moreover, the pastry crumbled the moment it entered his mouth. The texture was excellent. Moreover, the fillings were emitting a faint warmth, as if one had eaten honey. "Not bad," Bu Fong exclaimed in admiration. Even though in his opinion, there were still many flaws in this plate of pastries. Xiao Yinyu's eyes lit up. It was rare to hear praise from Owner Bu. Xiao Xiaolong and Ouyang Xiaoi also impatiently took a piece of pastry and stuffed it into their mouth. Just like that, the 4 of them sat facing each other and enjoyed the delicacies. This warm atmosphere immediately dispersed much of the coldness in the alleyway. Owner Bu, come and try this plate. These are pineapple jade cake. Finally, Xiao Yinyu took out a plate of pastries from the lunchbox with a face full of expectation. She passed it to Bufang while blinking her eyes and said in a serious manner. Chapter 143. Is it delicious? Xiao Yinyu nervously asked as she watched Bufang put the pineapple jade heart cake into his mouth. The light in her eyes became even more intense. Bufang knitted his brows as he savored the strange taste of the pineapple jade heart cake. A strange expression appeared on his face. Was this really made by the same person? There was a huge difference in the taste. This taste isn't very good. It's too sweet. Moreover, it was steamed for too long. The jade core inside is too hard. Also, Bufang subconsciously began to give pointers. He was serious when it came to food. Once he started to give an evaluation, it would be an unceasing torrent. Xiao Xiaolong and Ouyang Xiaoyi stared dumbfoundedly at Bufang, who was getting more and more enthusiastic as he spoke. The corners of their mouths could not help but twitch. What are you eating? Stop eating. It's so unpalatable anyway. Xiao Yinyu's charming face instantly flushed red. A dark red blush appeared on her face like clouds. She was both angry and infatuated. Her beauty was unparalleled. She snatched the pineapple jade heart cake back and placed it back into the food container in a fit of pique. Bufang was stunned. What was going on? Could it be that his evaluation was wrong? No. This pineapple jade heart cake was indeed unpalatable. It was obviously made by a novice. It was on a completely different level from the pastries he had eaten earlier. Oh, not on the same level? Bufang was stunned for a moment. Then, his gaze subconsciously fell on Xiao Yinyu. He could feel Xiao Yinyu's resentful gaze. Bufang was not an idiot. He quickly understood what was going on. This pineapple jade heart cake was definitely made by Xiao Yinyu and not by her mother. This would explain why there was such a huge difference in the taste. Xiao Xiaolong and Ouyang Xiaoyi could not help but burst into laughter when they saw Bufang's embarrassed expression under Xiao Yinyu's angry gaze. Owner Bu, it's rare for my sister to cook. You actually criticize the pastries she prepared with great care. You've completely offended my sister this time, Xiao Xiaolong said with a smile. The corners of Bufang's mouth twitched. This pineapple jade heart cake was indeed disgusting. Even if it was made by Xiao Yinyu, he was not used to flattering her. However, the fact that Xiao Yinyu and the other two would come looking for him tonight warmed his originally lonely heart. He felt that he had to do something to express his gratitude. Cook a dish to express my gratitude? Bufang shook his head and threw this thought out of his mind. Xiao Yinyu and the others often came to his store to eat and were familiar with the dishes here. Therefore, it would seem insincere if he were to cook the store's dishes to express his gratitude. Today was the eve of the Spring Festival, which had the same meaning as New Year's Eve on Earth. Bufang pondered for a moment, then stood up and walked toward the store. Wait a moment. Let me cook a delicacy for you, Bufang said lightly while walking to the kitchen. Owner Bu is going to cook? The eyes of Xiao Yinyu and the others lit up. There was no need to mention Owner Bu's culinary skills. The delicacies he cooked left them with endless aftertaste. Now, he was actually going to personally cook a delicacy. This was the first time something like this had ever happened. They were immediately filled with anticipation. After they waited for a while, Bufang walked out of the kitchen with a big basin in his hand. The three of them were immediately puzzled. What was Owner Bu planning to do? Bufang did not answer their questions. Instead, he placed the big basin in front of them. The weight of the big basin was obviously not light. Moreover, it was filled with white glutinous rice flour. The glutinous rice flour was sparkling and translucent, just like crushed crystals. Bufang poured the scalding spirit spring water into the basin and then stirred it with his hands. Owner Bu, what are you doing? Xiao Xiaolong asked as he looked at Bufang with a puzzled expression. Bufang indifferently glanced at him and said, "Don't say anything, just watch." Then, Bufang raised his fist. Dense true energy surged out from his lower abdomen and wrapped around his fist like a glove. Bang! With a loud bang, Bufang's fist rapidly smashed into the big basin that was still spinning. Under the precise control of Bufang's true energy, the vortex suddenly trembled. Bufang pulled out his fist and smashed his other fist down. A loud bang resounded, as if a mirror had been shattered. Looking at Bufang's violent and ferocious movements, Xiao Yanyu and the others were instantly dumbfounded. Was he cooking a delicacy? Were he really not venting his anger? If those punches were to land on the flesh, wouldn't that be terrible? After an unknown number of punches, Bufang's movements were no longer as wild as before. Instead, they had a hint of gentleness. Although each punch still produced a thunderous sound, it was still a little shocking. "This! Oh my God!" Xiao Xiaolong cried out in surprise. He stared at Bufang's fist that was covered with true energy. He saw that there were actually white strands of silk stuck to the surface of the true energy. Bufang raised his fist. On his fist, there were densely packed strands of silk. The strands were bright and shiny. They were even finer and smoother than the best silk. Bang! After the last punch, Bufang no longer moved. He dispersed his true energy and raised his fist. The strands of silk also disappeared. The three of them immediately looked toward the basin curiously. They saw a warm and sparkling glutinous rice lying in the center of the basin. It was emitting hot steam. Even though there was no fragrance, the three of them could not help but gulp down a mouthful of saliva. "Smelly boss. Is this the delicacy you made with your fist? Is it edible?" Ouyang Xiaoyi asked. "Yes, but it tastes even better after being processed." Bufang said, "Actually, you can try making it at home as long as you control your true energy well." "What is the name of this delicacy?" Xiao Yinyu's pleasant voice rang out. "Thousand-wrapped silk rice cake," Bufang said. Then, with a wave of his hand, the dragon bone kitchen knife appeared in Bufang's hand. With a flourish of the knife, the rice cake was directly cut into 4 pieces. After returning to the kitchen, Bufang placed the rice cake on a blue and white porcelain plate and steamed it in a steamer basket. "Come in," Bufang shouted at the three of them who were still sitting at the entrance. "Is it done?" The three of them were immediately overjoyed. They walked into the store and immediately saw the 1,000-wrapped silk rice cake placed on the table. It was ordinary and unremarkable. The three of them did not notice anything different about it. However, this fragrance, the rich fragrance of glutinous rice, was accompanied by a sweet aroma. It wrapped around the tip of their noses like strands of silk. The sweetness was neither thick nor faint. It just so happened to trigger their appetites. Their saliva unconsciously flowed out of their mouth. "Give it a try. This rice cake is meant to be eaten on the night before the spring festival. It is meant to wish for a bright new year," Bufang lightly said. The ingredients of this 1,000-wrapped silk rice cake were specially purchased from the system. His crystals were deducted. However, Bufang did not care. Since the three of them were willing to come today, the affection they represented was not something that mere crystals could compare to. The only thing he could do was to make a delicacy to express his gratitude. Xiao Yinyu gently and elegantly picked up the 1,000-wrapped silk rice cake. Her moist and glossy red lips gently parted, revealing her pearly white teeth. She lightly bit down. Then, Xiao Yinyu's beautiful eyes suddenly widened. Her eyes were filled with disbelief. So the so-called 1,000-wrapped silk was really 1,000-wrapped silk. Chapter 144. The moment the 1,000-wrapped silk year cake entered her mouth, Xiao Yanyu felt as if she had bitten onto a sponge. Furthermore, the layers of this sponge were extremely soft. As the silk-like threads rubbed against Xiao Yanyu's pearly white teeth and red lips, she felt as if a gentle breeze was caressing her, causing her delicate body to slightly tremble. A fragrant and sweet taste suddenly burst forth. The rice cake that entered her mouth seemed to suddenly burst open like a broken silk thread, continuously bouncing off and patting against the back of her mouth. It was as if she was receiving a light massage. It was incomparably comfortable and the taste was excellent. The sweetness enveloped her taste buds and slowly seeped into her mouth. The speed was not fast, but it made Xiao Yinyu feel as if the entire world had become sweeter. A blush instantly appeared on Xiao Yinyu's pretty face and her body unconsciously became bashful. She felt a little unnatural. When the 1,000-wrapped silk year cake entered her mouth, she felt as if the clothes on her body were falling apart like the silk rice cake in her mouth. How embarrassing! Xiao Xiaolong and Xiao Yinyu felt the same. However, when Bufang glanced at him, he noticed that a blush had also appeared on his face. That shy and timid appearance made Bufang's mouth twitch, and he was speechless. Delicious! Ouyang Xiaoyi was the first to praise. Her face was filled with joy. Being able to taste the smelly boss's new dish was simply the greatest happiness. Furthermore, this dish was so delicious. Don't rush, you guys continue to taste it. The real feeling has yet to come out, Bufang said as he also took a bite of the 1,000-wrapped silk year cake. The three of them were suddenly startled. Could it be that there was something different about this 1,000-wrapped silk year cake? Immediately, the three of them suspiciously took another bite. After eating a few more bites, they gradually became dumbfounded as they immersed themselves in the soft sweetness. Bufang quietly tasted the rice cake. His expression was somewhat lifeless, but his gaze was distant and deep. The 1,000-wrapped silk year cake was not only wrapped with silk, but also with threads of sorrow. This was the deeper meaning behind Bufang's 1,000-wrapped silk year cake. This rice cake was personally made by Bufang with his fists, and it was filled with all kinds of emotions in Bufang's heart. This was a dish with emotions. As Ouyang Xiaoyi ate, her big eyes became a little moist. She did not know why, but tears were welling up in her eyes. There was an indescribable sadness in her heart. This feeling was so strange. It felt like he was reminiscing and lonely at the same time. Xiao Yinyu and Xiao Xiaolong ate without uttering a single word. However, it was clear from their expressions that they were also affected by the 1,000-twined silk rice cake. They silently ate the rice cakes and quickly finished all of them. The taste was very good, and it left an endless aftertaste in their mouth. However, the layers of emotions that seemed to be stacked on top of each other made them unable to hold back the tears in their eyes. Sis, after eating this rice cake, why do I keep thinking about the 3 years my mother was bedridden? I suddenly feel so sad, Xiao Xiaolong said. Xiao Yinyu closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then, she opened her eyes and said with a smile that was like a flower blooming after a rain, "Silly brother, isn't mother already awake?" She tasted the emotions within the 1,000-twined silk cake. However, Xiao Yinyu knew that this was not the emotion that Bufang wanted to express to them. Perhaps only Bufang himself could taste the true taste of the 1,000-twined silk cake. Help me thank Auntie when we go back. The cake was very delicious. After finishing the 1,000-twined silk cake, Xiao Yinyu and the others were about to leave. Bufang stood at the door and said to the three of them. Xiao Yinyu smiled sweetly. She was somewhat surprised. She did not expect Owner Bu to thank her? This was really strange. Alright, I'll tell mother. It's rare to get praised by Owner Bu for his craftsmanship, Xiao Yinyu said. The corners of Bufang's mouth twitched. Looking at the backs of the three of them, he muttered, if only the kneading skills of this pastry were better, and the control of the heat during the steaming process was better, it would not be bad. Bufang's murmur was not loud, but it was very obvious in this quiet alleyway. In the darkness, Xiao Yinyu's delicate body clearly staggered. Well, it turned out that Owner Bu was also a person who knew how to be polite. The alleyway was once again quiet. Bufang raised his head and looked at the 2 silver plates that were trying hard to emit light. The corners of his mouth slightly curled up, then he turned around and went back into the store. The doors were closed. Host, the system's reward has been released. Please check. The solemn voice of the system rang out. Bufang, who had just wiped off the water stains on his hands, was immediately startled. He was so preoccupied with the Ouyang family that he even forgot to check the system's reward. He immediately calmed down and began to check his reward. Host, Bufang gender, male age, 21 true energy cultivation level. 5th grade, has reached the state of imitating objects with true energy. As the god of cooking in the fantasy world, the host can try to use true energy to imitate cooking utensils and cook more delicious dishes. Work hard, young man. Cooking talent, 1-star skills. Level 2-star cutting technique, 10 out of 100, Level 1 Big Dipper carving technique, 30 out of 100 tools. Golden Dragon Bone Kitchen Knife, God of Cooking set, God of Cooking overall rating. Elementary Chef has already lit up his talent. He can finally research and cook independent dishes. True Energy Processing Ingredient. His cutting and carving techniques have also reached the level of God of Cooking. System level, 5 stars, conversion ratio is at 70%. The host is allowed to capture ingredient. System reward. Cooking technique of rainbow-colored water dumplings, 1 fragment of the God of Cooking set, 1/3. After Bufang finished checking the system interface, his gaze fell on the system's reward for leveling up. He wanted to see what the dish reward was this time. Rainbow-colored water dumplings? Bufang asked suspiciously. He was very clear about dumplings. Water dumplings were actually dumplings cooked in different ways. One was steamed dumplings and the other was boiled dumplings. However, this rainbow-colored water dumplings. Bufang was suddenly curious. However, he was already used to it. It was impossible for the dish given by the system to cheat him. The so-called rainbow-colored water dumplings must have its own special characteristic. Bufang suddenly felt a little impatient to go to the kitchen and cook a serving of rainbow-colored water dumplings. However, after thinking about it, he still gave up. That was because he had already made the 1,000-wrapped silk rice cake that night and consumed a lot of true energy. He was already a little tired and his body was not in its best condition, which would affect his performance. Thus, he chose to go back to his room and sleep. Maintaining sleep was extremely important to Bufang, even though he was already a man who could be called the Battle King. Outside the store, there were still fireworks soaring into the sky above the alleyway, blooming with resplendent splendor. On the streets of the Imperial City, the excited shouts of the children were still resounding. The festive atmosphere of the Spring Festival was becoming more and more intense. That night, the Imperial City was especially lively. Everyone was waiting for the arrival of the new year. The 2 silver plates in the pitch-black night sky were getting closer and closer. When the 2 silver plates completely overlapped, it signified the beginning of a new year and the official arrival of the Spring Festival. Bufang lay on his bed and looked at the 2 bright moons in the sky through the window. He suddenly felt an indescribable joy in his heart. Finally, amidst the cheers of the people from all over the Light Wind Empire, the 2 bright moons completely overlapped and turned into a silver plate. It was as smooth as a jade plate and emitted a sparkling radiance. Amidst the sky full of fireworks, the Spring Festival finally arrived quietly. Bufang looked at the 2 bright moons overlap. He laid on his bed and let out a light breath before slowly closing his eyes. Chapter 145. The morning of the Spring Festival had just arrived and smoke was rising from the chimneys of the Imperial City. The people who had worked hard for a year woke up early and began to prepare a sumptuous breakfast for the Spring Festival. At the gate of the Imperial City, the guards guarding the gate yawned as they enviously gazed at the gradually bustling scene within the Imperial City. Even though it was the Spring Festival, the guards of the Imperial City still could not let their guard down. Even though the Sex rebels had been tricked by the old emperor, no one knew if these cunning sects would strike again. As guards, protecting their homes was their duty. Even though at this moment, their minds were filled with visions of a hot bed, beautiful wives, and adorable children, as well as a steaming hot spring festival breakfast personally prepared by their wives. Suddenly, the gaze of one of the guards who was immersed in his beautiful fantasy suddenly froze. He immediately became spirited and looked into the distance with a grave expression. In the distance, two figures, one big and one small, slowly walked toward the imperial city. An invisible pressure was transmitted onto the guards' bodies, causing their expressions to slightly change. Two battle kings? The guard was astonished. For them, a battle king was already an unreachable existence. Crunch, crunch. The sound of teeth crushing bones could be clearly heard, accompanied by the sound of chewing mixed with saliva. It caused goosebumps and chills to rise all over the bodies of the two guards at the entrance of the imperial capital. They suddenly felt a kind of eerie feeling. "Brother, we've arrived at the imperial city." An indistinct voice rang out. It only said one sentence before the sound of bones being chewed once again reverberated. "You damn fatty, can you not talk to me when you're eating?" The other voice seemed to be slightly annoyed, and its tone was filled with disgust. Crunch, crunch, got it? Oh, got it, I won't say it next time. Crunch, crunch. A simple and honest laughter echoed along with the sound of bones being chewed. Then, the flustered and exasperated voice of the other person frantically grumbled. In the eyes of the two imperial city guards, the figures of two people gradually became clearer. Seeing these two people, the pupils of the guards constricted at the same time. One was fat and one was thin, one was tall and one was short. The tall one was very fat, and his whole body was full of fat. His small eyes were almost squeezed to the point that they could not be seen. As for the short one, he was extremely skinny, and had a protruding mouth and monkey cheek. His appearance was rather comical. The fatty was wearing an apron in front of him, and there was a pocket on the apron. He reached into the pocket and took out a chicken drumstick that was glistening with oil. He stuffed it into his mouth, and he didn't even spit out the bones. He chewed for a while and swallowed it. Being short wasn't normal either. He wasn't tall, but he was carrying a huge black wok on his back. It was as if he was carrying a turtle shell on his back. "You two, stop right there." The guard stopped them and said solemnly. It was obvious that the two of them were abnormal. As guards, they had to stop them and question them. "Brother, he stopped us." "Cockji, cockji." The fatty took out a chicken drumstick from the pocket of his apron and stuffed it into his mouth. As he chewed, he looked at the short one with an aggrieved expression. The short one glanced at the fatty in disdain, then said to the guard, "Brother, we are chefs who are here to participate in the Imperial City's 100-family banquet this year. We are from Qingyang town." The guard was taken aback. These two strange fellows were really chefs. Were all chefs nowadays so unconventional? They directly brought their own wok to participate in the competition? Qingyang town? That Qingyang town that is known as the entrance to the wildlands? The guard repeated the three words, Qingyang town. Then, his pupils constricted as if he had thought of something. He looked at the two people in shock. The short one was very satisfied with the guard's expression. He proudly raised his sharp chin and said to the guard, "Then, can we go in?" The guard swallowed a mouthful of saliva and turned his body to the side. The two of them walked straight into the imperial city. When the fatty passed by the guard, he paused for a moment and grinned. The fat on his face was jiggling. "Brother, you're a good person. You actually let us in. Here, I'll give you half a chicken drumstick." The fatty took out a chicken drumstick from his apron and placed it into his mouth. His large white teeth suddenly bit down and directly broke the drumstick in half. He chewed while handing the remaining half of the chicken drumstick to the guard. The guard was dumbstruck as he received the drumstick. Just like that, he blankly watched the tall and short two people step into the imperial city. Once the fatty left, The guard immediately came back to his senses and threw the chicken drumstick on the ground with a look of disgust on his face. A chef from Qingyang town. I remember that the chefs there are all very scary. A trace of fear appeared on the guard's face as he lightly muttered. Crunch, crunch. Big brother, why did we come to participate in this year's 100 family banquet? Why don't we eat a few more chicken drumsticks instead of competing with those mediocre chefs? It's not interesting at all, the fatty said to the short one as he bit into the chicken drumstick. The two brothers were called Ah Lu and Ah Wei. The fatty was called Ah Lu and the skinny one was called Ah Wei. They were chefs from Qingyang town and were very famous in that area. They learned culinary arts from an old chef and often went to the wildlands to hunt spirit beasts. Their dishes were very bold, but at the same time, they were also very delicious. Even though they were not very famous in the Light Wind Empire, there was no one in Qingyang town who did not know of them. I already told you not to talk to me when you're eating. How many times do I have to repeat myself? If it wasn't for the fact that the old man told us to participate in this year's 100 family banquet and said that the prizes for this year's 100 family banquet might be pretty good, and he hoped that we could bring them back to show our filial respect to him, do you think I would come here to cook with my personality? Ah Wei raised his sharp chin and coldly snorted in disgust. What's the prize? Did the old man reveal anything about it? Ah Lu swallowed the chicken drumstick mixed with bone dregs in his mouth, and then curiously stared at Ah Wei with his beady eyes. How would I know? Ah Wei snorted as he carried his big black wok on his back and continued to walk forward. Ah Lu was stunned for a moment. Then, he continued to pull out an oily and fragrant chicken drumstick from his apron pocket and stuffed it into his mouth. The apron pocket was like a bottomless pit and there seemed to be an inexhaustible supply of chicken drumstick. Then, Ah Lu happily chased after Ah Wei's back. Crunch, crunch, big brother, where are we going now? Are we going to the chef's gathering point prepared by the Empire? Ah Lu asked in a muffled voice. Then, Ah Wei's flustered and exasperated voice rang out again, Scram! Don't talk to me when you're eating. Why are we going to the gathering point? What's the point of gathering with a bunch of trash chefs? Let's go find something to eat, Ah Wei said. Bufang got out of bed. After washing up, he patted his cheeks to wake himself up a little. He had an exceptionally good night's sleep last night, allowing his entire body and mind to relax. It could be said that it was the most peaceful sleep he had ever had since he arrived in this world. Walking into the kitchen, Bufang began to skillfully practice his carving and cutting skills. His current carving skills had already improved a lot compared to when he first started practicing. He could even carve a lifelike flower out of a piece of soft tofu with an extremely smooth arc. On the contrary, the improvement of his cutting skills was a little slow. After all, the difficulty of the meteor cutting skill had increased after reaching the second level. After finishing his daily training, Bufang began to cook. Of course, the first dish he cooked was the sweet and sour ribs. This was Bufang's favorite. Today, Bufang specially added a little more so that the lazy dog could eat as much as it wanted. After all, it was the spring festival. After a while, the kitchen was filled with a rich aroma. The aroma was so good that it was intoxicating. After all, the sweet and sour ribs was the embodiment of the word intoxicating. It was ribs that could intoxicate people. After carrying out a plate full of sweet and sour ribs, Bufang opened the door and a chill surged into the kitchen. The temperature did not drop in the slightest because of the spring festival. After letting out a breath, Bufang placed the steaming hot plate of sweet and sour ribs in front of Blackie. Blackie, who was lazily lying on the ground, suddenly widened its eyes and stuck out its tongue in excitement. Perhaps it would only reveal such an expression when eating sweet and sour ribs. This gluttonous dog. Just as Bufang placed the plate of sweet and sour ribs in front of Blackie, Bufang suddenly heard two clear footsteps coming from behind him. Crunch, crunch, oh. Big brother, there's a small store here. This meaty aroma really smells good. Bufang stood up. Before he could turn around, the sound of bones being chewed rang out behind him. The indistinct voice suddenly shouted in surprise. Chapter 146. Alu stared at the blue and white porcelain plate in front of the big black dog. The orange-red steaming hot sweet and sour ribs was placed on top of the plate. He was completely dumbfounded as he stared blankly at the plate. The chicken drumstick in his hand stopped moving, and he even forgot to chew the meat in his mouth. This sweet and sour ribs was truly fragrant. It was even more fragrant than the roast meat cooked by the old man who taught them in Qingyang town. Under this aroma, Alu felt that the chicken drumstick in his hand had become a little bland and tasteless. Alu glanced at the chicken drumstick in his hand and then grinned. He stuffed the drumstick into his mouth and swallowed it after chewing a few times. Just as the big black dog was about to enjoy the sweet and sour ribs alone, its body suddenly trembled. It jerked its head up and noticed Alu's fixed gaze on it. The greed and desire in Alu's eyes were all directed at the sweet and sour ribs in front of it. This human actually dared to covet the Lord Go's sweet and sour ribs? Blackie was furious. It stood up and turned around to hide the sweet and sour ribs. It faced Alu with its butt and wagged its tail in a rather arrogant manner. Alu's line of sight was blocked and he reluctantly gave up on pursuing the sweet and sour ribs. He smacked his lips and swept his tongue around his lips as if he wanted to lick away the aroma of the sweet and sour ribs in the air. Keep your tongue. Can you not act like a chef who has never seen the world? Don't tell others that you're my brother like this. Away frowned. His face was scrunched up in disgust. Even though he had to admit that the aroma of the sweet and sour ribs was not bad, his actions were not as unbearable as Alu's. When Bufang heard the noise behind him, he turned around and raised his eyebrows. He looked at the two strange people in surprise. A fat man wearing an apron and a skinny man carrying a big black wok on his back. Why are they acting so unconventionally? Are they here to cause trouble? Who are you? Bufang calmly asked. After being reprimanded by Wei, Alu reluctantly retracted his tongue. He was still savoring the taste of the sweet and sour ribs. Wei glanced at Bufang and was a little puzzled. He suspiciously sized up Bufang before asking, "Did you make this sweet and sour ribs?" It looked and smelled. Wei did not even need to take a closer look to conclude that this was definitely a classic and outstanding sweet and sour ribs. He did not even look and did not need to take a closer look to make Wei was certain that this was an outstanding sweet ribs. Impossible. Wei subconsciously shook his head. He was very confident in his culinary skills. Ever since he had received the old man's training, his culinary skills had skyrocketed. It was definitely not something an ordinary chef could compare to. "I don't believe you, you lied to me. Go and call the real chef out," Wei said as he glanced at Bufang. Bufang was taken aback. He looked at Wei as if he was looking at an idiot. What did he mean by calling out the real chef? "I, Bufang, am standing right here. Who else is there to look for?" Bufang could not be bothered with this unreasonable fellow. He turned around and stepped into the store, heading toward the kitchen. Wei looked at Bufang's back and frowned. "Did I make a mistake?" The speechless look in Bufang's eyes before he turned around made Wei doubt his life. "Come, Alu. Let's go into the store and take a look," Wei said. He raised his sharp chin and gave a faint smile. "I didn't expect to encounter such an interesting store the moment I arrived in the Imperial City." Wei muttered to himself. However, there was no response even after a long time. He immediately turned his head around in suspicion and saw Alu wriggling toward Blackie with small step. His hand was even continuously pulling out a few chicken drumsticks from the pocket of his apron. "Cute little doggy. Can I exchange 2 chicken drumsticks for a piece of your sweet and sour ribs? Is 2 not enough? Then 3? 4? As Alu wriggled, The fat on his face was also trembling. He was truly captivated by the taste of the sweet and sour ribs. Alu's favorite thing to do was to eat. He was especially sensitive to meat. Exchange your sister. Hurry up and come in. Away turned his head and saw this scene. His lungs almost exploded from anger as he immediately roared. When Alu heard Away's angry roar, he still unwillingly walked toward Away's direction. In the end, both of them stepped into the store. The layout of the store was very cozy. At least, it gave Alu and Away a good first impression. Especially the cleanliness of the store, that spotless feeling simply made them happy. Bro, hurry up and look at the menu behind you. Alu stuffed the 4 drumsticks in his hand into his mouth. With a tinge of anger, he fiercely bit down on them. With a crunching sound, all 4 drumsticks were swallowed. Then, he said. When Away heard this, he turned around to take a look. In an instant, his eyebrows twitched and he immediately cursed, F***ck. This store is really shady, even more shady than our store. Because their store in Qingyang town was located at the intersection of the wildlands, the prices of their dishes were extremely expensive. However, there was a reason why they were so expensive. The ingredients for their dishes were all personally captured from the spirit beasts and spirit herbs in the wildlands. Furthermore, after being meticulously cooked, they were even able to retain the spirit energy within the ingredient. Not only did they taste good, but they were also beneficial to one's cultivation. This was the reason why their dishes were so expensive. However, why were the dishes of this store also so expensive? Could it be that the owner of this store also personally went to the wildlands to capture ingredients? However, even if he personally went to capture ingredients, the prices were still a little too ridiculously expensive. Their store also had dishes that were worth crystals, but there were only 1 or 2 of those dishes. However, in this store, everything was paid with crystals. Gulp. Away was a little unconvinced. Where's the owner? I want to order. Away shouted. Bufang slowly walked out of the kitchen and glanced at Away. The other party's indignation seemed to be completely displayed on his face, and there was even a hint of provocation in it. Oh, what do you want to order? Say it. Bufang was expressionless. Brother, let's order the sweet and sour ribs. I really want to eat. Alu mumbled from the side. Don't talk to me while you're eating. Away grumbled as he glanced at Alu. To be honest, Alu's words slightly tempted him, but he still held back in the end. Give me 2 servings of egg-fried rice. Only the simplest dish can show the level of a chef. Besides, the sweet and sour ribs is so expensive. If it doesn't taste good, our money would be wasted. Away said. Bufang glanced at the 2 strange brothers and the corner of his mouth twitched. He did not say anything and only told them to wait for a while before stepping back into the kitchen. Alu and Away found a seat and sat down. Even though the interior of the store was completely different from the environment outside and filled their hearts with warmth, the interior of the store was actually not that luxurious. It was just like a very ordinary store. Brother, other people eat lavish meals during the Spring Festival, but we're eating dry egg-fried rice in this store. Why don't we order another serving of sweet and sour ribs? Otherwise, red braised pork is fine too. Alu said as he swallowed another chicken drumstick. Do you really plan on contributing all the crystals in your wallet to this store? Are you stupid? Away sneered. He sat on the chair with the big black wok on his back and snorted. Alu's face was immediately filled with disappointment. His fat jiggled. Not being able to eat meat is too sad. Alu muttered. Then, he pulled out 2 chicken drumsticks and stuffed them into his mouth, fiercely biting them. Suddenly, the kji chewing sound in his mouth stopped. His chubby nose twitched violently and his eyes immediately lit up as he looked toward the direction of the kitchen. There, a thin figure slowly walked out with 2 plates of piping hot egg-fried rice in his hands. Chapter 147. This aroma. Alu gulped down the entire chicken drumstick in his mouth. His gaze was already completely focused on the egg-fried rice that Bufang had brought over. From afar, the egg-fried rice looked as if it was emitting a golden glow. It was extremely dazzling and completely attracted their attention. The aroma of the egg and rice drifting over mixed together and gushed into Alu and Awei's noses, causing both of them to reveal an intoxicated expression. When Bufang placed the egg-fried rice in front of the two of them, Alu eagerly picked up the spoon and started eating. He was truly tempted by the aroma of the egg-fried rice. The aroma of eggs was actually a type of aroma that could excite a person's appetite. With a scoop, a gap appeared on the egg-fried rice. The 80% cooked egg liquid was sticky and elongated like a silk thread. However, the aroma that had always been wrapped in the rice instantly burst out from the gap and surged out, drowning Alu's entire body. Alu let out a muffled groan. Then, he directly swallowed the spoonful of rice that he scooped up. His eyes, which were almost invisible due to the fatty meat, suddenly widened. He excitedly looked at Awei. After swallowing the rice, he said in disbelief, "Brother, this egg-fried rice is really delicious." The eggs he used should be the eggs of the third-grade spirit beast, Thunderstorm Pigeon. However, the quality of his rice is also very good. It is not the slightest bit inferior to the spirit energy rice that the old man meticulously took care of. Furthermore, the degree of control over the heat is really high. The 80% cooked egg liquid can rely on the heat of the ingredients after it is taken out of the wok to solidify the instant the egg liquid enters the mouth. This requires extremely precise control. In short, it's delicious, Alu said in a muffled voice. After he finished speaking, he impatiently immersed himself in the battle over the egg-fried rice. Bufang was slightly surprised. Looking at the fatty who was engrossed in eating, his heart was also slightly moved. This fatty was actually able to grasp the important cooking procedures and techniques of this egg-fried rice with just one taste. Moreover, he was able to understand the ins and outs of these ingredients. His deduction was basically correct. This undoubtedly showed that this fatty was also a chef, and not an ordinary one at that. Awei's heart skipped a beat when he saw Alu's expression. He knew very well how picky his younger brother was when it came to non-meat dishes. He could be very tolerant when it came to meat dishes, but when it came to non-meat dishes, he would become very picky. Awei's egg-fried rice was also served. He was not as impatient as Alu. Instead, he carefully admired the color and aroma of the egg-fried rice. Only after he had a grasp of the taste did he taste the egg-fried rice. It had to be said that the taste of the egg-fried rice had indeed exceeded Awei's expectations. It was so delicious that he was at a loss. However, this was not the main point. The main point was that the egg-fried rice actually contained a dense amount of spirit energy. Why does this egg-fried rice contain so much spiritual energy? This was completely illogical. Therefore, under Alu's astonished gaze, Awei ordered another dish. After eating a few dishes cooked by Bufang, Awei completely understood why the store's dishes were so expensive. It was because all of these dishes actually contained spirit energy, and the density of the spirit energy was completely beyond Awei's expectations. It was even denser and denser than the dishes in their store. "You're welcome to come again," Bufang indifferently said to the two figures walking out of the store after putting away the crystals. The two brothers, Alu and Awei, silently walked out of the store. As they walked amidst the snowstorm, Alu did not even bother eating the chicken drumstick as a serious look appeared in his eyes. If Bufang also participated in this year's 100 family banquet, based on the quality of the dishes they just ate, they would not have the slightest chance of getting first place if they did not act seriously. The pressure that Bufang gave them was too great. No wonder the old man said that there were crouching tigers and hidden dragons on the continent and told them not to be too arrogant. They had just arrived at the imperial city, and they were already dealt a blow. "Brother, I feel like we're going to lose against Owner Bu," Alu asked Awei, who did not seem to have much confidence. Awei's footsteps came to a halt. His pointy face slightly tilted up as he seriously said, "That's why we have to be serious. I originally thought that we would be able to get first place by just playing around, but it seems like it won't be as easy as I imagined." Straightening his body, Awei actually took off the black wok on his back and smashed it onto the ground. The impact caused the ground to slightly tremble as if it had caved in. "Let's give it our all. If we want to get first place, we must display our true culinary skills. Otherwise, we won't even have the qualifications to compete with Owner Bu," Awei said. When Alu saw Awei's serious expression, his expression turned serious and the fats on his face trembled. Then, he reached into the pocket of his apron and took out a chicken drumstick. He solemnly bit into it and began to chew. The lively atmosphere of the Spring Festival still enveloped the entire imperial city, or rather, the entire Light Wind Empire. Every household happily prepared a sumptuous feast for the Spring Festival, filling the table to the brim to reward themselves for a year of hard work so that they could experience the beauty of delicacies. Above the gate of heavenly mystery, the preparations for the 100-family banquet were also in full swing. Gigantic tables were carried out one after another and placed above the gate of heavenly mystery. Then, a bright red tablecloth was draped over the tables. The specifications of this year's 100-family banquet had been expanded due to Jiqingshu. Therefore, the amount of preparation work had become even greater and no one dared to let their guard down. The main area of the Gate of Heavenly Mystery was densely filled with tables, and on the inner area of the Gate of Heavenly Mystery, several simple stoves had been set up specifically for the chefs to prepare the delicacies required for the 100-family banquet on the spot. This was undoubtedly a test of the chefs' true skills. However, the chefs who dared to participate in the 100-family banquet were all famous chefs in the Light Wind Empire, so there was no need to worry about their skills. They were all confident in their own abilities. Amidst the preparations, a dazzling array of ingredients was also served. Every chef wanted to cook a different dish, so the choice of ingredients was also varied. Because it was the Spring Festival today, the store's business was not too good. Therefore, Bufang could only lazily curl up on a chair, holding a cup of warm water in his hands and sipping it in satisfaction. However, when a few travel-worn eunuchs rushed over, Bufang knew that he was about to get busy. "Owner Bu, may I know what kind of ingredients you need? Please tell me so that I can send someone to purchase them," a eunuch respectfully said to Bufang. This eunuch was originally following behind Lian Fu, so he knew very well how frightening Bufang was and did not dare to slight him in the slightest. Bufang muttered to himself for a while. He had actually been thinking about what kind of delicacies he wanted to cook for the 100-family banquet. After all, it was the 100-family banquet and the quantity of the dishes needed to be large. Otherwise, it would be impossible to satisfy the needs of several hundred households. Thus, Bufang concluded that the most important point of this year's 100-family banquet was not only the quantity of the dishes but also the quality. Thus, the type of dishes he wanted to cook was extremely important to Bufang. The guests from the 100-family banquet were all selected from the imperial city's commoners. Many of them might not even have cultivated and their bodies did not even have true energy. If Bufang used high-grade spirit energy ingredients to cook spirit energy delicacies, even though the quality would be guaranteed, it would not be able to satisfy everyone's needs. It was a thankless task. Thus, Bufang pondered for a long time about the dishes he wanted to cook today before finally making his decision. Bufang waved at the eunuch and lightly said, "Help me prepare these ingredients." Chapter 148. This. Owner Bu, do you really only need these ingredients? The young eunuch was dumbstruck as he listened to the ingredients Bufang told him. His slightly immature face was filled with astonishment and disbelief. "Yes, that's all. Prepare it early, I'll be there tomorrow morning," Bufang said. The young eunuch was startled. "Owner Bu, you're not going today? The chefs from all over the Light Wind Empire are gathered together. With Owner Bu's culinary skills, he will definitely be appreciated by many of them." Bufang indifferently glanced at the young eunuch, shook his head and said, "I won't be going. I'll be going to the Gate of Heavenly Mystery tomorrow morning. Just prepare the ingredients I need." "Then, what about those chefs? They keep saying that they want to get to know Owner Bu. If Owner Bu doesn't go, it might incur the wrath of the masses." The young eunuch had a conflicted expression as he kindly reminded Bufang. The corners of Bufang's mouth curled up when he heard the young eunuch's words. He patted the young eunuch's shoulder and said, "Go back and tell them that if anyone is unhappy with me, they're welcome to look for me." How domineering! As expected of the rumored black-hearted store owner of the Imperial City. He really has a personality. However, there are too many chefs. Sigh, I'll be at a disadvantage. The young eunuch seemed to have seen through the vicissitudes of life. He sighed and turned around to return to the palace to report. As Bufang watched the young eunuch's departing figure, he picked up the hot cup and drank a mouthful of the steaming hot water. He, Bufang, was a 5th-grade battle king. Even though his battle prowess was terrible, it did not mean that he would be bullied as he pleased. He had no interest in the so-called organization. He only wanted to quietly cook delicious food. Inside the Imperial City's luxurious inn. Even though it was the spring festival, the luxurious inn was still full. It had been booked by someone to serve as the accommodation for chefs from all over the country. In the spacious hall of the luxurious inn, at this moment, the hall was crowded with people. It was bustling with noise and excitement. A group of people were squeezed in the hall, drinking and chatting with each other. There were men and women, fat and thin. These people were all chefs from all over the country who had received invitations from the Imperial Palace to participate in the 100-family banquet. Each of them was a famous chef in their respective towns and cities, and their culinary skills were very good. These chefs all had polite smiles on their faces as they greeted each other. Perhaps they weren't very familiar with each other, but since they were all gathered here, they could naturally get to know each other and take care of each other in the future. However, with so many chefs present, it could be seen that they were secretly surrounding a few chefs standing in the center. The chefs all had big bellies and smiles on their faces. They raised their wine glasses and greeted the people around them. However, it was obvious that the people around them were looking at them in awe. These chefs were none other than the head chefs from the Imperial Kitchen. They were originally selected by Emperor Chongfeng from all over the country, so they were already famous. Now that they were in the same line of work, they were naturally at the top. Chef Jean, as expected, the owner of that black-hearted store, didn't come. A slightly chubby middle-aged chef with a slightly chubby face raised his wine glass and said to a bald man who was slightly younger than him. Even though he was smiling as he spoke, the disdain in his eyes could be seen. The bald-headed chef Jean glanced at him and smiled faintly. He did not say anything. The name Bufang was very famous among the chefs of the Imperial City, especially the head chefs of the Imperial Kitchen. When the late emperor was still alive, this name was their nightmare. Ever since the late emperor went to Fang Fang's little store for a meal, he became even stricter with the chefs after he returned to the Imperial Palace. There were many chefs who were scolded by their supervisors almost every day. That was because Emperor Chongfeng did not even bother to look at the dishes they cooked. They were completely not to the emperor's liking. During those days, chefs like them were suffering unspeakable hardship. Every day they had to think of what kind of dishes would satisfy the emperor's liking. He's just a junior who was lucky enough to cook a dish that satisfied the late emperor's liking. Does he really think that he's some top-notch chef? Without decades of experience, does he even know what true cooking is? The bald chef Jean said disdainfully as he drank the wine in his glass in one gulp. In his opinion, Bufang was just a lucky chef who was chosen by the emperor. If not for the emperor, what was Bufang? He would not even have the chance to catch the attention of the chefs of the imperial kitchen. Owner Bu will also be attending the 100 family banquet tomorrow. We, the chefs of the imperial kitchen, must teach Owner Bu what true delicacies are, one of the chefs added with a sneer. Does anyone here know what ingredients Owner Bu prepared? We should be able to determine what Owner Bu is cooking based on the ingredients, one of the chefs said. The eyes of the surrounding chefs lit up as well. Chef Jean rubbed his bald head and the corners of his mouth curled up as he said, "What's there to see? I'm confident that my dish tomorrow will definitely crush that Owner Bu." That's right, Chef Jean is right. When the time comes, as long as we reveal our identities as chefs of the imperial kitchen, we will be invincible. One of the chefs laughed. Within the imperial city, the names of the imperial kitchen's chefs were well known. In the eyes of the people, the imperial kitchen's chefs were synonymous with delicacies. As long as the dishes they cooked were delicious, they would definitely be delicious because they were cooking for the emperor. Who was the emperor? He was a dragon among men, a supreme being. To be able to become his chef, one naturally had to be better than the majority of the chef. Even if I don't reveal my identity as a chef of the imperial kitchen, it's still more than enough for me to crush him. He's just a lucky little chef, what's there to be afraid of? Chef Jean was extremely confident. His confidence was glistening under the sunlight just like his bald head. Chef Jean, if Owner Bu is not a concern, then we must pay attention to the two brothers from Qinjiangzhen. You might not have heard of them before, but they are famous gourmets in the wildlands of Qinjiangzhen. The designs of their dishes are very bold and the ingredients they use are also very unique. In short, they are very strong. A chef solemnly said. Many of the other chefs also sucked in a breath of cold air. It was obvious that they had also heard of the two brothers from Qinjiangzhen. Chef Jean narrowed his eyes and nodded. I've also heard of their names before. They are quite skilled. However, the 100 family banquet cannot be compared to the taste of those adventurers from the wildlands. It will be very difficult for them to win. When the chefs heard this, they all began to praise Chef Jin's exquisite culinary skills and began to flatter each other. As they toasted each other, the night quietly passed by. The next day, the sun had just risen from the east. The imperial capital's gate of heavenly mystery had begun to put on the final decorations and decorations. The guards were also standing at their respective posts to ensure the order of the 100 family banquet. Furthermore, a spectator area was specially set up so that some of the citizens who did not qualify could watch the 100 family banquet from a fixed spot. The Gate of Heavenly Mystery had also specially demarcated an area for the spectators. In the spacious plaza of the Gate of Heavenly Mystery, 300 banquet tables were laid out and covered with red tablecloths. From afar, they looked like blooming red flowers. On the side of the banquet table, there were many stoves, which were prepared for the chefs. The audience could clearly appreciate the cooking of each chef. This was a rare opportunity. When the first ray of sunlight shone down from the sky, a deafening drumbeat rang out within the Gate of Heavenly Mystery. Dong dong dong. Every beat felt as if it was pounding on one's heart, causing one's mind to tremble. After the drumbeat stopped, the Gate of Heavenly Mystery opened and the citizens waiting outside slowly entered in an orderly manner. The 300 lucky households found their seats and sat down with smiles on their faces. There were so many citizens in the imperial capital, and they were naturally happy to be one of the lucky household. Meanwhile, the citizens who were seated in the spectator area were envious of those seated at the banquet tables. How blissful it was to be able to taste the dishes of so many chefs. Another 3 drumbeats rang out and chefs dressed in neat chef robes walked out with their heads held high and their chests puffed out as they walked toward their stoves. Outside the Gate of Heavenly Mystery, a skinny figure leisurely walked over with his hands behind his back. Chapter 149. Oh my, Owner Boo, you're also participating in this year's 100 family banquet. That's great, I'm really looking forward to Owner Boo's dishes. Just as Bufang stepped into the gate of heavenly mystery, he saw a plump meatball enthusiastically greeting him from afar. A look of astonishment immediately appeared on his face. Why was Fatty Jean here? However, after thinking about it, he felt relieved. After all, there was no rule on who would be the lucky winner of the 100 family banquet. It was not surprising that Fatty Jean would appear here. Owner Boo, this is my son and this is my wife. Come, say hello to Owner Boo. Fatty Jean said to Bufang with a smile as he pulled along his wife and a similarly plump son. Bufang slightly nodded at the sweet-tempered woman standing beside Fatty Jean. It must not have been easy for Fatty Jean to find such a sweet-tempered woman. Fatty Jean did not chat with Bufang for too long. Bufang quickly walked toward the stove at the side. The little eunuch had clearly told him the location of his stove yesterday, so Bufang easily found it. When he arrived in front of the stove, Bufang sized it up and immediately furrowed his brows. However, he secretly sighed in his heart. After all, he was not in the store's kitchen. This stove was really too simple and crude. However, it was not a hindrance. Behind Bufang's stove stood a little eunuch. This little eunuch was specially assigned to light the fire for Bufang's stove. Every stove had a little eunuch like this who could be considered as an assistant. Where are the ingredients I requested? Bufang asked the little eunuch. The little eunuch's expression froze for a moment and he shook his head in confusion. Bufang lightly nodded. He was not in a hurry because he saw people continuously moving ingredients to their respective stoves in the distance. His ingredients should be arriving soon. Sure enough, after waiting for a while, the ingredients that Bufang needed were brought over. The gazes of the surrounding chefs fell on Bufang's seat. Many of them were very curious about the dish Bufang was about to cook. The bald-headed chef Jean narrowed his eyes and crossed his arms in front of his chest. He looked in the direction of Bufang and the corner of his mouth curled up with a hint of disdain. As the head chef of the imperial kitchen, he had his own pride. Suddenly, Chef Jin's gaze froze and an expression of surprise appeared on his face. That was because there were too many types of ingredients in Bufang's dish. Furthermore, they were all of different colors. Most importantly, none of these ingredients were high-grade ingredient. Instead, they were just ordinary ingredients that were slightly more refined. Some of them did not even contain the slightest trace of spirit energy. Could it be that Owner Boo wants to use ordinary ingredients to make dishes? Participate in the 100 family banquet this time? All of the chefs were at a complete loss. In their opinion, no matter how delicious a dish made with ordinary ingredients was, how could it compare to a dish made with high-grade ingredients? Just the aroma formed by the catalysis of spirit energy was enough to instantly defeat everything. Owner Boo had become too arrogant. Was he looking down on them? Was he planning to use these ordinary ingredients to make an ordinary dish to defeat them? Many chefs sneered one after another. They were looking forward to Bufang's show. Once the cooking began, Bufang would understand how important real spirit energy ingredients were. As the court band played, the festive atmosphere in the Gate of Heavenly Mystery became even more intense. A large group of guards walked out from the Great Strength Hall and stood on both sides. The ministers of the Imperial Palace, dukes, and generals also walked out of the Great Strength Hall while chatting and laughing. In the 100 family banquet, other than the lucky commoners, there were also some influential families in the imperial city who brought their families to participate. After all, there were not many opportunities to taste the culinary skills of the entire empire's chefs. In the Ouyang family, Ouyang Zongheng, Ouyang Xiaoi, and one of his wives were all smiles as they sat down at a banquet table. There were many influential families present at this banquet, such as the Xiao family, the Yang family, and so on. They were all influential families in the imperial city. In this year's 100 family banquet, they were looking forward to Bu Fang's dishes the most. An opportunity for owner Bu to come out of his store to cook dishes was even rarer than the appearance of the 100 family banquet. Naturally, they were looking forward to it, and an endless stream of discussions began as soon as they sat together. Under the gaze of tens of thousands of people, the emperor arrived in splendid attire. He wore a dragon robe and a spirit beast cloak as he gently sat on the highest seat in the gate of heavenly mystery. With a face full of smiles, he looked at the festive atmosphere that was in full swing. Ji Qingshu exhaled a breath of hot air. Then, he gave a formal speech to motivate the crowd, stirring up the atmosphere once again. When all of the speeches were over, Ji Qingshu announced the start of the 100 family banquet. Chef Jean pulled out a kitchen knife that was emitting a cold glint. This was a kitchen knife that he had specially made for the most famous blacksmith in the imperial city. It was quite heavy and could cut through iron as if it were mud. It had been with him for many years and he could use it very smoothly. In today's 100 family banquet, the dish that he was going to cook was none other than the 4 happiness meatballs. He had prepared a lot of high-quality spirit beast meat, ranging from grade 1 to grade 3 spirit beasts beef and grade 1 to grade 3 spirit beasts pork. The former's meat was soft and its lines were extremely clear, while the latter was fatty but not greasy and was filled with spirit energy. When these two types of meat were mixed together to create the 4 happiness meatballs, it would definitely be able to conquer everyone. This was Chef Jin's confidence. The ingredients he used were all top-notch. How could the trash ingredients prepared by Bu Fang compare? True delicacies could only be made with outstanding ingredient. How could trash ingredients be used to make a delicacy? This was why Chef Jin was so disdainful of Bu Fang's actions. He initially thought that Bu Fang, as the owner Bu, would be a difficult opponent to deal with. However, from the looks of it now, his reputation was undeserved. The ingredients prepared by the chefs on the scene were all of rather high quality. The highest was even the mutton of a 4th-grade antlered sheep. It was obvious that everyone was planning to use these high-grade ingredients to make a name for themselves. Cries of surprise immediately rang out from the crowd. At this moment, in order to prepare the ingredients, several hundred chefs instantly took action. Each of them displayed their cutting techniques to their heart's content. The cutting techniques of the skilled chefs were dazzling to the eyes. Their kitchen knives reflected the sunlight and were incomparably dazzling. The crowd had never seen such a spectacular scene before. Cries of surprise immediately spread out like a tidal wave. The showy cutting techniques and the crisp clattering sounds of kitchen knives colliding with the chopping board instantly lingered in the sky above the gate of heavenly mystery. Bu Fang took out the ingredients prepared by the imperial palace. They were actually all ordinary ingredients such as vegetables, meat, fruits, and so on. They were all things that were commonly seen in the homes of commoners. Compared to the high-grade ingredients prepared by the other chefs, such as the meat of 3rd or 4th-grade spirit beasts, these ingredients were simply too shabby. However, Bu Fang's expression did not change. After taking out all of the ingredients, he twisted his neck and prepared to start preparing the ingredient. The symbol in his hand flashed, and a green smoke curled up as a pitch-black kitchen knife fell into his hand. The golden dragon bone kitchen knife. The more Bu Fang used it, the more he got used to it. He felt as if the knife was connected to his arm, and it was extremely easy to wield. Holding the kitchen knife in his right hand, he lightly flicked the knife with his left hand. A slight vibration spread out and the corners of Bu Fang's mouth slightly curled up. He abruptly slammed his palm on the table. As true energy surged out, the meat on the table flew into the sky. Chapter 150. The corners of Chef Jin's mouth slightly curled up. His face was filled with enjoyment as he listened to the exclamations around him. He could feel that the gazes of the audience were all gathered on him. He was the center of attention. He was extremely confident that his knife skills were the best in the entire imperial kitchen. Perhaps he might not be able to compare to some of the veteran chefs who had decades of experience in the art of cooking. However, his knife skills were undoubtedly number one in the imperial kitchen. After he finished cutting a plate of beef with his fancy knife skills, he raised his head and realized that the exclamations around him had become even louder. However, these exclamations were no longer directed at him. His expression slightly stiffened as he furrowed his brows. His bald head seemed to be radiating light under the sunlight. He turned his gaze around and realized that everyone was looking at a stove not far away from him. That was the spot where Owner Boo, whom he had always disliked, was sitting. This caused his expression to become even uglier. He was a little displeased. It would be weird if he was in a good mood after his limelight was stolen by someone he disliked. Therefore, he wanted to take a good look at how Owner Boo was going to steal his limelight. After all, he had the additional benefit of his shiny bald head under the sunlight. Bufang slammed his palm on the table. The only thing that flew up was the meat. With a twirl of the dragon bone kitchen knife in his hand, he twirled it around and then sliced toward the meat in the air. This meat was only ordinary pork and not spirit beast meat. For the dragon bone kitchen knife that could cut through iron like mud, it was simply too easy. Therefore, as the dragon bone kitchen knife continuously spun and sliced that piece of meat, the large piece of pork was actually floating in the air and gradually becoming smaller in the eyes of the audience. Bufang was holding a white porcelain plate in one hand. The sliced pieces of pork were all placed neatly on the white porcelain plate as if they had been meticulously arranged. However, looking at Bufang's relaxed expression, it was obvious that this was only a very basic knife skill. The pork was sliced into slices by Bufang. The slices were as thin as a cicada's wings and even the veins on them were extremely clear. After slicing the pork, Bufang twirled his knife while taking out the vegetables and fruit. Then, he diced them all. The way he diced them was even more peculiar. He basically did not separate them and simply lifted them up and tossed them into the air. The golden dragon bone kitchen knife was like a gust of wind as it swept past. It was as though there was a dark stream of light bursting forth. The vegetables and fruits were all cut up and scattered to the side. Bufang scooped out the lively bamboo prawns from the cold water, and with a twist of his fingers, the kitchen knife streaked across the air and peeled off the outer shell of the prawns, leaving behind only the green prawn meat. Bufang's movements were as smooth as flowing water, so smooth that it was a feast for the eyes. The way he handled the ingredients caused the surrounding people to exclaim in admiration. In less than the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn, Bufang minced the prawns and mixed them with minced meat, vegetables, and fruit. The colorful ingredients were mixed together, creating a very bright and eye-catching scene. While stirring, Bufang added some sauce and seasonings from time to time. Although it had not been cooked yet, there was already a faint fragrance wafting out. In the distance, many people were observing and attentively watching Owner Boo's actions. This was the first time they saw Owner Boo cook, and they did not expect his actions to be so natural and unrestrained. What does Owner Boo want to do? So many ingredients were diced and mixed together. Was he going to make stuffing? Golden shumai? That's not right. The golden shumai's fillings aren't these ingredients, Xiao Xiaolong and the others muttered in confusion. They had no idea what Bufang wanted to do. Not only Xiao Xiaolong and the others, but many of the chefs present were also puzzled. If he was going to make stuffing, then what was he going to do with the sliced pork that was as thin as a cicada's wing? Everyone was a little confused, but the surrounding onlookers were cheering endlessly. Bufang's handsome movements of processing the ingredients had completely amazed them. It turned out that chefs were really handsome when they were serious. After the stuffing was ready, Bufang used clean water to wash his hands. His slender and fair palms were stained with water, and he also used a clean cloth to wipe them clean. Then, Bufang took out a big bag of flour. This was the flour that Bufang had asked the young eunuch to find for him. It was the best quality flour in the imperial city. Although it was not as good as the flour prepared by the system, Bufang pinched his fingers and sniffed it. He was quite satisfied. The true energy vortex in his dantian revolved and the true energy wrapped around his palms. Bufang's expression suddenly became serious. He poured the flour into a big basin, then poured some warm water into it and began to stir it. Under the mix of true energy, the flour quickly gathered together. Bang! When the flour was kneaded until it was somewhat smooth, Bufang slapped it out with his palm. This large lump of dough floated in the air, and Bufang casually slapped it with his palm. With a slap, he directly slapped it. The lump of dough trembled, then continued to fly up. When it landed again, Bufang wrapped it with true energy and swatted it again. Just like that, this lump of dough was like a ball that was constantly swatted away by Bufang. It landed again, was swatted away again, and landed again. Xiao Meng, who was sitting at a table not far away, immediately focused his gaze. With his cultivation level, he could naturally see Bufang's small movement. Every slap from Bufang was actually not a simple slap. When a slap landed on the lump of dough, it would cause the whole lump of dough to tremble. A layer of formless waves would instantly surge out, giving the lump of dough a new look. To put it simply, every time Bufang patted it, it was as if the lump of dough was refurbished from the inside out. This was a very high level of true energy control technique. The requirements for true energy control were extremely strict. Xiao Meng knew that he would have to go through a lot of training in order to achieve this. This move of Bufang's once again caused the crowd to exclaim in surprise. It was too showy, too flirtatious. Ouyang Xiaoi grinned and said, "I didn't expect the smelly boss to be so flirtatious and flashy when he's cooking." Xiao Yinyu also covered her mouth and laughed. Indeed, when she thought of Bufang's usual serious and flirtatious appearance, and then looked at his flirtatious appearance as he patted the dough in front of the stove, she suddenly could not help but laugh. The dough was already kneaded. It seemed like Bufang's dish was about to come out as well. Could it be a bun? Or the new golden shumai? Many people were puzzled and guessed endlessly. There were many dishes that required dough. However, as for what dish it was debatable. Judging from the way Bufang handled the stuffing, it was impossible to guess. After the dough was kneaded, the entire dough was emitting hot steam. This was caused by Bufang's true energy. Every time he refurbished it, the intense friction was enough to make the dough extremely hot. The dragon bone kitchen knife spun and rapidly cut the dough into small lumps. Bufang then placed the pieces of dough to the side. "Come over and start a fire. Boil the water in the wok." Bufang waved his hand at the little eunuch who was standing in the distance, dazzled by his own flirtatious appearance. Then, Bufang heaved a sigh of relief and raised his head to look at his surroundings. The dishes of the chefs around him were almost done and were beginning the final finishing stage. The rich aroma of the dishes rose and lingered in the entire gate of heavenly mystery. The sky above the gate of heavenly mystery seemed to have become hazy, as if the aroma had condensed into clouds. This scene was very shocking. It was a rare sight to see in 100 years. With so many chefs cooking at the same time, the scale of the scene was too large. Bufang withdrew his gaze and ignored the completion of the dishes around him. His slender fingers nimbly trembled for a moment, then he picked up a slice of pork that was as thin as a cicada's wing and poured the mixed stuffing into it. With a pinch of his hand, it was kneaded into a ball. Taking a dough lump, Bufang pressed it into a thin dough crust and wrapped the stuffing into the dough crust. When the dough crust was rolled up, layers of wrinkles appeared on it and curved like a crescent moon. It was as exquisite as a work of art. Crescent moon dumplings, the most classic method of wrapping dumplings. That's right, the dish that Bufang chose to make was dumplings. It was not an ordinary dumpling, but a dish that Bufang modified based on the system's latest rainbow water dumplings reward. It was suitable for the masses to eat together. Chapter 151. In the middle of the bustling gate of Heavenly Mystery Square, in front of many stoves, a shiny bald head was extremely eye-catching under the sunlight. Chef Jean had a solemn expression on his face as his hands skillfully pinched out meatballs one after another. These meatballs were cooked using a mixture of many different meat. The taste was definitely extraordinary, and it was a dish that he was extremely proud of. For the sake of this 100-family banquet, he had given it his all. Bang, bang, bang. All of a sudden, Chef Jean stopped pinching the meatballs. He discovered that his stove was actually slightly trembling and a deafening sound was transmitted into his ears. He subconsciously looked toward the direction of the sound and saw that the mountain-like fatso was actually tightly clenching his fists and fiercely hammering a piece of meat on the stove. Is he cooking? Is there something wrong with this fatso's head? The corners of Chef Jin's mouth twitched as he coldly mocked. Who else in the world could cook like this fatso? It was as if he was fighting. Rip! A hair-raising sound rang out and all the hairs on Chef Jin's body stood on end. He widened his eyes and looked behind the fatso. There, a short and skinny man was carrying a large black wok on his back and holding a dagger in his hand. He was currently dissecting a struggling spirit beast on the ground. Chef Jean swallowed a mouthful of saliva. His pupils constricted and his heart turned cold. The crazed look in the skinny man's eyes made him feel as if he was not a chef but a ruthless executioner. What kind of people are these? This year's 100-family banquet is really too reckless. They didn't even filter out the participants. This is simply ridiculous. Chef Jin's expression was cold as he muttered to himself. Then, he once again wholeheartedly devoted himself to his cooking. Gurgle, gurgle. The water in the wok was already beginning to boil and white steam was rising into the air. At this moment, Bufang had already finished pinching more than a dozen rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings. This time, he did not cook the dumplings according to the system's recipe. Instead, he chose to make some changes. He used some ordinary ingredients as the fillings so that there would not be too many restrictions for the consumer. After eating, there would also not be any discomfort due to the lack of spirit energy. Many of the chefs in the surroundings had already finished cooking many dishes, and the eunuchs brought them to the table of the emperor, who was sitting on the high platform, as well as the tables of some of the court officials. As the upper echelons of the imperial capital, they were naturally the first to taste these delicacies. These people kept nodding while eating. After all, it was the work of a great chef, so the taste was naturally good. Ji Qingxue picked up a mouthful with his chopsticks. The expression on his face did not change. He simply nodded and ordered his servants to remove the dish. Following that, more and more dishes were served. The commoners finally began to taste these delicious dishes. They had long been tempted by the fragrance that lingered in the air above the square. They really could not bear it, and many people's stomachs began to rumble violently. Chef Jin's dish was also successfully completed. He poured the specially prepared sauce onto the 4 happiness meatballs. The steaming hot and fragrant 4 happiness meatballs were ready to be served. Ji Qingxue looked at the good-looking 4 happiness meatballs and raised his eyebrows. He nodded his head slightly and picked up a meatball with his chopsticks and took a bite. The instant his teeth broke through the surface of the meatball, a thick juice burst out from within and instantly flowed into his mouth. The rich fragrance filled the air, causing Ji Qingxue to be unable to resist sucking in a mouthful. The juice contained a rich meaty flavor. Furthermore, it was made from different meaty flavors. Several different meaty flavors were mixed together at the same time. After going through the bald-headed Chef Jin's special processing, there was actually no longer any sense of rejection, and the taste was surprisingly good. Ji Qingxue nodded his head in satisfaction after finishing a meatball. This was the only dish that interested him so far. As expected of the Imperial Kitchen's head chef, not bad, Ji Qingxue praised with a smile. When Chef Jean, who was still cooking in front of the stove, saw the smile on the Emperor's face, he was immediately overjoyed. He felt unprecedentedly good, as if a seed had instantly blossomed on top of his head, giving him complete confidence. Meanwhile, the nobles and commoners of the imperial capital were also endlessly praising the 4 happiness meatballs. It was obvious that this dish had conquered them. After all, he was still the head chef of the imperial kitchen. Chef Jin's bald head became even more resplendent, and he could not help but want to hum a song. What owner Bu? What brothers from Qingyang town? They were all trash. Bu Fang's slender hands were rapidly kneading the rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings. The number of crescent moon dumplings on the stove was increasing. When the water in the wok was completely boiling and the steam was so turbulent that it caused Bu Fang to slightly squint his eyes, Bu Fang placed the dozen or so dumplings into the wok. Plop, plop. One by one, the rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings obediently jumped into the wok. After being washed by the boiling hot water in the wok, they bobbed up and down for a while before continuing to sink. Bu Fang glanced at the dumplings in the wok, then continued to walk to the other side of the stove and kneaded the dumplings. He had quite a lot of fillings and could probably knead a few hundred of them. However, the speed at which Bu Fang was wrapping the dumplings was extremely fast. In just 2 to 3 breaths, he was able to complete a crescent moon dumpling. Continue to light the fire, don't let it get too small, Bu Fang reminded the young eunuch who was burning the fire. The young eunuch hurriedly nodded and added a few more pieces of wood into the stove. The dumplings quickly floated up. Bu Fang's eyes and hands were sharp. The moment the dumpling floated up, he scooped it up and poured it into a blue and white porcelain bowl. There were only 3 rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings in a single porcelain bowl. The white and sparkling rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings did not emit 7 colors as their name suggested. The skin of the dumpling was smooth and translucent, as if one could see the fillings inside through the skin. The fillings seemed to have a faint fragrance lingering around them. It was extremely tempting. Bu Fang scooped up a spoonful of soup base, then sprinkled some chopped green onions into the bowl, completing the rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings. The eunuch walked in front of Bu Fang and looked at the exquisite crescent moon dumplings in astonishment. The fragrance of the dumplings was not as strong as that of other chefs' dishes. However, the eunuch did not say anything. He carried the dish and walked toward Ji Qingxue. This is the dish cooked by owner Bu? Ji Qingxue looked expectantly at the dish presented by the eunuch. However, when he saw the ordinary crescent moon dumplings that did not have a strong fragrance, the anticipation in his heart immediately plummeted. He was a little disappointed. There were no dumplings in the Light Wind Empire, so Ji Qingxue did not recognize this dish. However, Ji Qingxue had eaten Bu Fang's golden shumai before. The rich fragrance and the glossy oil left an endless aftertaste in Ji Qingxue's mind. In contrast, the dumplings placed in the blue and white porcelain bowl that looked like cute babies did not have the rich fragrance he had imagined. Ji Qingxue sighed. Owner Bu, what is the name of this dish? Even though he was a little disappointed, Ji Qingxue still asked the eunuch. Owner Bu said that this dish is called rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings, the eunuch respectfully said. Rainbow-colored? What do you mean by 7-colored? Why are these crescent moon dumplings all white in color? Ji Qingxue was stunned. He glanced at the white dumplings in the blue and white porcelain bowl and was immediately puzzled. Rainbow-colored, it naturally had to be multicolored. How could there be such a thing as 7-colored? Could it be that there was a trick to this dish? Ji Qingxue's eyes immediately lit up. He remembered Bu Fang's terrible cooking style. It was naturally impossible for him to bring out such an ordinary dish. The anticipation in his heart that had already fallen surged forth once again. Ji Qingxue could not wait to taste the rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings. Using a soup ladle, Ji Qingxue scooped up a steaming crescent moon dumpling. After blowing on it, he lightly took a bite. After biting through the white and tender skin of the dumpling, Ji Qingxue's eyes instantly widened and were filled with disbelief. A rich fragrance seemed to have suddenly exploded in Ji Qingxue's mouth. That instant surge of fragrance caused Ji Qingxue's entire body to sink into a sense of satisfaction. From the opening of the dumpling, a rich fragrance wafted out. As Ji Qingxue looked at this fragrance, his nostrils nearly widened. This F*King fragrance actually transformed into a rainbow. Chapter 152. The aroma materialized and instantly gushed out from the opening of the dumpling. Ji Qingxue slightly narrowed his eyes as the rich aroma instantly entered his nostrils and stimulated his taste buds. The rainbow-like aroma appeared quickly and disappeared just as quickly. By the time Ji Qingxue came back to his senses, the rainbow-colored aroma had already faded away. After gently chewing for a while, a sense of happiness suddenly burst forth. The corners of Ji Qingxue's mouth unconsciously curled up into a smile as an uncontrollable joy emerged in his heart. His mood was actually changed by the dumpling. After eating a mouthful of the dumpling, many emotions actually emerged in his heart. They were like the rainbow-colored rainbow, colorful and varied, and finally settled on joy. Ji Qingxue was not surprised that the dumplings did not contain any spirit energy. Because the ingredients Bufang used were all ordinary ingredients and not spirit energy ingredients, it was not surprising that they did not contain any spirit energy. However, the texture of the dumpling skin did make Ji Qingxue exclaim in surprise. The dumpling skin was soft, tender, and fragrant. It was as if the dumpling skin was extremely smooth in his mouth, like a gentle breeze blowing past. Ji Qingxue could not help but swallow the remaining half of the dumpling into his mouth and happily savor it. After swallowing the dumpling, Ji Qingxue picked up the blue and white porcelain bowl and blew on it. Then, he took a sip of the soup. The soup looked extremely clear, but it did not have the bland taste of boiling water. Instead, it was like a fresh seafood soup, overflowing with a rich aroma. A mouthful of dumpling and a mouthful of soup. In this cold winter, it was simply enough to make one feel so happy that even their hearts were warm. As Bufang placed the wrapped crescent moon dumplings into the wok, he quickly scooped up the floating dumplings. Each blue and white porcelain bowl was filled with 2 to 3 dumplings and sprinkled with a few chopped green onions. It was a simple and comfortable process. The eunuchs served the rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings to the officials in the imperial court so that they could also have a taste. After everyone took a bite of the crescent moon dumpling, they were shocked by the substantial rainbow-colored aroma. The aroma that wafted into their faces dazzled them. It was simply too beautiful. Moreover, the taste of the dumplings was also beyond their expectations. It was so delicious that they almost swallowed their tongues. A blissful and joyous expression appeared on everyone's face. It was truly a delicacy that could make one feel happy. Finally, it was the turn of the commoners. These people were already a little impatient. When they saw the blissful expressions on the faces of the imperial court's officials, they could no longer hold back their cravings. What kind of delicacy could actually make people so happy? All the commoners who received the rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings could not wait to have a taste. After they took a bite, a rainbow-colored aroma wafted out and enveloped them. A rich fragrance spread in all directions and floated in the air. Everyone could not help but take in a deep breath of the fragrance. The craving in their hearts was so strong that they could not control it. A pair of commoners, an old married couple, took a bite of the dumpling and felt as though they had become much younger. A joyful expression appeared on their faces. "Old woman, come and have a taste. This dish is really delicious." The old man scooped up a white crescent moon dumpling with a spoon and handed it to an old lady beside him with a smile on his face. The old lady immediately smiled shyly and rolled her eyes at the old man. However, she happily took a bite of the dumpling. A calm yet warm feeling arose in the hearts of the two old people. Two white-haired old men ate the dumplings as happiness filled the air around them. A young man ate a crescent moon dumpling. Beside him was his wife, who had been in a cold war recently. The two of them had a conflict over a small matter, and were currently in a phase where neither of them cared about the other. His wife's dumplings were not served, so she could only glance at her husband, who was happily eating from time to time. Her heart was getting angrier. Suddenly, a white porcelain spoon scooped up a steaming white dumpling and placed it in front of her, causing her to be slightly taken aback. She turned her head and saw her husband looking at her with a gentle expression. "Hee, wife, come and have a bite. It's very delicious. This dish seems to have magic," the husband said with a gentle smile. Then, he personally placed the dumpling next to his wife's mouth. His wife, who was originally filled with anger, suddenly felt her resentment disappear. A blush appeared on her face as she shyly took a bite of the dumpling. The rainbow-colored aroma wafted out, causing his wife's face to be filled with intoxication. "You wretch, there are so many people here. How embarrassing!" His wife ate half of the dumpling. When she saw her husband swallow the dumpling that she had taken a bite of, her face immediately became even redder. She pinched her husband's cheek and shyly said. This scene continued to happen in the gate of Heavenly Mystery Square. Every citizen who had tasted the rainbow-colored crescent moon dumpling was filled with joy. Even couples who had conflicts with each other had reconciled. The charm of the dumplings made everyone exude a joyous mood, further enhancing the festive atmosphere. "Why isn't it our turn yet? It's too slow." Some of the more impatient citizens even left their seats and rushed toward the stove where Bufang was. With someone taking the lead, many people followed suit and left their seats. The order of the scene suddenly became a little chaotic. Bufang knitted his brows and expressionlessly looked at the group of people who were rushing toward his stove. On the high platform, Ji Qingxue had already finished the 3 dumplings in his bowl. He even drank the soup without leaving a single drop. He put down the bowl and let out a long breath of hot air, feeling extremely satisfied. "Stop them and make them sit obediently in their seat. Otherwise, they will all be disqualified and kicked out of the gate of Heavenly Mystery." Ji Qingxue glanced at the somewhat chaotic situation below the square and calmly said to the eunuch beside him. The eunuch accepted the order and left. Immediately, many armored guards entered the hall and rearranged the order. The citizens did not dare to disobey the emperor's orders. They could only hold back their cravings as they sat on their seats in anticipation and waited for Bufang's dumplings. Chef Jin's face was deathly pale. His bald head seemed to be incomparably dull under the sunlight. How could this be? How could this be? How could he possibly make delicious dishes with ordinary ingredients? Chef Jin was in a daze. The reaction of the crowd and Ji Qingxue's satisfied expression were undoubtedly telling him that Bufang's rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings completely crushed his 4 happiness meatballs. For the usually arrogant Chef Jin, this was like a bolt from the blue. He had always boasted in front of the other chefs that Owner Bu, a chef who had gotten lucky, was nothing to worry about. However, reality had ruthlessly slapped him in the face, causing his face to swell up and his bald head to become dull and gloomy. "I don't believe it." Chef Jin's emotions suddenly became a little agitated. He actually put down the meatball he was kneading and planned to walk toward Bufang's stove. "Chef Jin, please finish your dish, don't walk around without permission." The eunuch who was responsible for keeping the fire quickly stopped him, and said in a sharp voice to wake him up. Chef Jin took a deep breath and gave a deep look at Bufang, who was methodically wrapping the dumplings in the distance. A cold snort. Sizzle. The sound of oil dripping into the fire entered Chef Jin's ears. Chef Jin was slightly startled and his gaze turned toward a spot not far away from him. His pupils constricted once again, and he sucked in a breath of cold air. The dishes of the two brothers, Alu and Wei, were also completed. However, the visual effect was simply too shocking. On top of Alu's stove was a gigantic iron rod. The iron rod was erected vertically and protruded out from under the stove. There was no pot on the stove, only a metal rod. On top of the metal rod was a gigantic roasted spirit beast meat that was fragrant and red. Glossy oil continuously seeped out from the surface of the spirit beast meat and dripped into the fire under the stove, emitting crackling sounds. Wei, who was beside Alu, had also completed his dish. It was also roasted meat, but the way he roasted it was completely different from Alu's. Wei was holding on to rootless skewers with one hand. Each skewer was skewered with red, fragrant, and glossy little spirit beasts. Chapter 153. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The fats on Alu's body were jiggling as he held a gigantic kitchen knife in his hand. His tiny eyes revealed a serious expression as he brandished the kitchen knife at an extremely fast speed, slicing away at the gigantic roasted spirit beast. Piece after piece of roasted meat was sliced off the gigantic roasted spirit beast by Alu and landed on the white plates on the table. Each plate contained a piece of roasted meat. Every time he finished filling up 5 plates, Alu would put down the kitchen knife in his hand, scoop up some sauce, and pour it over the roasted meat. A rich meaty aroma accompanied by the sweet and sour sauce instantly soared into the sky, washing away one's taste buds. Alu gestured to the eunuch to serve the dishes. Ji Qingshue's eyes slightly lit up as he looked at the tender and juicy roasted meat in front of him. The heat control of this roasted meat was perfect, and the veins on the meat were extremely obvious. With just a glance, he could tell that this was no ordinary spirit beast meat. Third-grade spirit beast, plum-spotted pig? Ji Qingxue muttered to himself as his heart thumped. The eunuch attentively handed over a dagger with a handle made of gold. Ji Qingxue took the dagger and used a pair of chopsticks to press down on the roasted meat. Then, he used the dagger to easily slice off a small piece of roasted meat. It was quite easy for the sharp dagger to slice through the roasted pork. As soon as the pork was sliced open, steam immediately gushed out from the cut. The steam was white and carried with it a rich fragrance. The fragrance was incomparably smooth, like silk-like milk. Ji Qingxue used his chopsticks to pick up the piece of pork and dipped it into the sauce. Then, he placed the piece of meat into his mouth and gently chewed. As he chewed, the expression on his face became completely immersed. He slightly narrowed his eyes as if he was enjoying the wonderful feeling of the meaty aroma. His entire body felt as if it was being washed away by the rising fragrance. He was so immersed that he almost didn't want to come back to his senses. After a long time, Ji Qingxue slowly opened his eyes and exclaimed in admiration with an intoxicated expression. Then, he continued to cut the pork. The sweet and sour taste of the sauce was simply irresistible to Ji Qingxue. When Alu saw the intoxicated look on Ji Qingxue's face, he chuckled mischievously. The fats on his face trembled violently. He originally wanted to pull out a chicken drumstick from his apron pocket and nibble on it. However, after thinking about it, he gave up on that idea. His master had taught him not to eat chicken drumsticks while cooking. Plate after plate of barbecued meat was brought out. The rich aroma and wonderful texture made everyone present intoxicated. Suddenly, Alu's nose twitched, and the flesh on his face trembled again. He turned his head to look at the stove where his brother was. There, a magical fragrance wafted out. It smells so good. I really want to eat it. Big Brother's culinary skills have indeed improved again. As Alu sniffed the fragrance, it was as if crystals were about to drip out of his mouth. There was no doubt about Ah Wei's culinary skills. Ah Lu had always been very confident in his brother, especially after being stimulated by Owner Bu this time. Gulp. As he sniffed the fragrance, the conflicted look on Ah Lu's face became even more apparent. I can't eat barbecued meat. I really want to eat chicken drumsticks. Bu Fang's expression was incomparably calm as he wrapped the dumplings. A rich aroma wafted over from afar, causing him to be slightly startled. He sniffed and slightly raised his eyebrows. He actually burned spirit herbs to smoke barbecued meat. Bu Fang subconsciously muttered. Even his movements of wrapping the dumplings slowed down a little. The spirit herbs contained rich spirit energy, which had a catalytic effect on the ingredient. It could improve the color and texture of the ingredient. Even though directly burning spirit herbs was an extravagant method, it was an extremely ingenious method when it came to barbecuing meat. Bu Fang's expression slightly changed. He had to admit that the aroma of the barbecued meat was really fragrant. The combination of the aroma of meat and the aroma of herbs produced an unexpectedly good reaction. As the fragrance wafted through the air, the expressions of everyone who caught a whiff of it changed. They turned toward the direction of the barbecued meat with intoxicated expressions. Their throats continuously rolled and thunderous rumbles came from their stomachs. Ji Qingxue, who had just finished eating Ah Lu's barbecued meat, had yet to recover from the aftertaste when he was attracted by the peculiar aroma. He could not help but stretch his neck toward the stove where Ah Wei was. Ah Wei was holding 5 skewers in one hand. On the skewers were spirit beasts that were glistening with oil. After these spirit beasts were processed, they became extremely adorable. After finishing his work, Ah Wei handed the 5 skewers in his hand to the eunuch. "One for the emperor, one for each table for everyone else," Ah Wei said as he raised his sharp chin. The eunuch was slightly startled. Then, he hurriedly nodded and carefully carried the skewers toward Ji Qingxue. He placed a skewer with a small and exquisite spirit beast pig on Ji Qingxue's table and distributed the remaining 4 skewers to the other ministers of the empire. Everyone looked at the spirit beast meat on the skewers. Even though the rich aroma was constantly spreading and the aroma was constantly tempting their taste buds, no one, including Ji Qingxue, dared to start eating for a long time. The main reason was that Ah Wei had roasted the meat so vividly that it looked as if it was wrapped in a layer of tender red skin. Every spirit beast was extremely adorable, so adorable that they did not dare to start eating. "Eat, what are you guys looking at? Delicacies are meant to be eaten, not to be looked at?" Ah Wei mocked with a sneer when he saw that the group of people actually did not dare to start eating. After mocking them, he walked back to the stove and continued roasting the spirit beasts. Ji Qingxue narrowed his eyes. Then, he grabbed a dagger and directly cut open the roasted pig that had its 4 hooves spread open and looked as if it was about to ascend to the heavens. Crack, crack, crack. The skin of the roasted pig was extremely crispy and tender. With a single cut, it was as if he was cutting through a piece of paper. The belly of the roasted pig was actually stuffed with ingredients as well. Once everything was cut open, the sauce-like ingredients inside would flow out and cover the entire roasted pig. "A dish within a dish?" Ji Qingxue cried out in surprise. The flavor of the sauce was even more mellow and he was completely unable to wait any longer. The orange-red sauce was different from Ah Lu's sauce. It seemed to be cooked with stock and mixed with spirit herbs. Finally, it was wrapped around the belly of the roasted pig. Once it was cut open, the sauce would automatically flow out. Ah Lu's sauce was considered a supplementary dish, but Ah Wei's sauce could be considered the main dish. He used a blue and white spoon to scoop up a mouthful of sauce, then used a dagger to cut a piece of roasted pig and dipped it into his mouth. The instant the sauce entered his mouth, all the hairs on Ji Qingxue's body stood on end. Even his nostrils were slightly emitting hot air. The roasted pig was incomparably smooth and tender when it entered his mouth. It did not have the chewiness of roasted meat at all. However, when paired with the delicious and mellow sauce that was like a mixture of countless ingredients, Ji Qingxue was instantly intoxicated. Slicing, scooping up the soup, putting it into his mouth, reveling in it, Ji Qingxue repeated this action many times. He actually finished half of the entire roasted pig in one go. There wasn't much of the broth and sauce that flowed out of the roasted pig either. Delicious! Truly delicious! Ji Qingxue could not help but nod with a smile on his face as he praised. Below, the corners of Ah Wei's mouth curled up. He raised his eyebrows and raised his chin. He turned his head toward where Bufang was as if he was provoking him. However, Bufang did not raise his head from beginning to end. He was still engrossed in wrapping the dumplings. Ah Wei's provocation ended in vain in the end. This made him feel somewhat inexplicably angry. He worked so hard to cook this delicacy in order to wipe away his previous humiliation and let Bufang know his prowess. However, Bufang did not seem to treat him as an opponent at all. Humph! Owner Bu, you will soon taste the taste of failure. Ah Wei coldly snorted. At this moment, as the chef's dishes were gradually completed, one delicious dish after another was also placed on the dining table. Almost all of the commoners had tasted the delicacy, even though everyone's progress was different. However, at least everyone had a joyous smile on their faces. Sometimes, delicacies had this kind of magical power. They could automatically make people happy and feel an indescribable happiness. Chapter 154. The 100 Family Banquet was an event held by the Empire to celebrate the Spring Festival. It was a joyous event in itself. The gate of Heavenly Mystery Square was filled with a steaming aroma, and the sounds of laughter could be heard continuously. The scene was extremely harmonious. The fragrance of the delicacies and the smiles of the diners intertwined together to form an unforgettable picture. The diners ate happily and the chefs were also very attentive in their cooking. It brought a different kind of warmth in this cold winter. However, after the warm atmosphere, the cruel competition began. The citizens would have to choose the number one chef of this year's 100 Family Banquet. For the diners, eating was blissful and joyous, but the choice was painful. Because the dishes of this year's 100 Family Banquet were simply too delicious. Whether it was the 4 happiness meatballs, the roasted spirit beast, or the rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings. These were all delicacies that they had never even heard of before. Many people were at a loss, but there was nothing they could do. Every one of them had the right to vote and they could not waste it. Otherwise, they would have come to the 100 Family Banquet in vain. After wrapping all of the dumplings, Bufang lightly exhaled. He wiped away the water stains on his hands and the sweat on his forehead. He also felt that wrapping several hundred dumplings in one go was quite taxing for him. The other chefs had also finished their dishes and were leaning against their stoves in a rare moment of leisure. Even though there were still a lot of ingredients left, it was already time for the selection, so they did not continue cooking. This also meant that this year's 100 Family Banquet was coming to an end. Chef Jin's gaze was a little fierce. He felt a little powerless. The strength of this year's participating chefs was simply too terrifying. Whether it was Owner Bu or the 2 brothers from Qinjiangzhen, all of them had a high chance of threatening his position. This made him feel a little nervous. Ji Qingxue stood up. Draped in a cloak made from the fur of a spirit beast, he slowly walked up to the high platform and surveyed the crowd. I wonder if everyone enjoyed this year's 100 Family Banquet? Ji Qingxue's voice was very calm, but it lingered around the entire gate of Heavenly Mystery Square. Steam was still rising from the stoves in the surroundings. As Bufang listened to Ji Qingxue's long speech, he put in a few dumplings. After cooking for so long, he was also a little hungry. The white dumpling was scooped out. It was sparkling white, chubby and cute. With a bite, the colorful fragrance instantly gushed out and enveloped his face, causing him to be slightly intoxicated. The 7-colored fragrance could only be drawn out after special treatment. The key was in the dough he had softened. The dough was meticulously kneaded with true energy and was filled with true energy. Layer by layer, it wrapped around the stuffing. After being cooked in the hot soup, it produced some catalytic effect and reflected the colors of the colorful stuffing. In fact, the fragrance that spread out was not materialized. To put it simply, it was like a mirage. However, the fragrance was real. After taking a sip of the heartwarming soup, Bufang exhaled lightly and took another bite of the dumplings. The delicious taste lingered around his taste buds, making him feel satisfied. Sometimes, just a small bowl of dumplings was enough to make you feel very satisfied. When Bufang finished his bowl of dumplings, Ji Qingxue finally ended his long speech. It was as if those high-ranking officials needed to say a lot of unimportant things before the event began. Bufang was already used to this. Next, each of you will have a special copper coin in your hand. This copper coin represents your vote. Today, there are so many delicious dishes from the chefs here. Which dish do you like the most? If you like it, put your copper coin on the porcelain plate in front of the chef stove. The one with the most votes will receive the prize prepared by the imperial court. Ji Qingxue did not say anything else. Instead, he retreated and sat on a chair. A eunuch stepped forward, waved his horsetail whisk, and announced the rules in a sharp voice. The commoners immediately whispered to each other, chattering as they looked at the special copper coin in their hand. When the eunuch announced the start of the orderly voting, the commoners immediately lined up and left their seats, walking toward the chef's stove at the side. Chef Jean, the 4 happiness meatballs you cooked are really delicious, I support you. A burly man excitedly placed a copper coin on the bald Chef Jin's porcelain plate with a ding-dong. Chef Jin's face immediately bloomed like a flower. He was the first to vote for him? It seemed like his 4 happiness meatballs were quite popular. Chef Jean rubbed his bald head and immediately felt radiant again. He looked provocatively at Bufang in the distance, then snorted at the chubby fatty beside him, who was continuously chewing on a chicken drumstick. His nostrils slightly flared. With the first vote, would the second one be far away? Fatty, your grilled meat is really delicious. Big sister supports you. This person supported Alu. Big Black Wok, your spirit beast grilled meat simply made me unable to stop eating, it was simply too delicious. As expected of a chef. Amazing. This person supported Ah Wei. Owner Bu. You are too handsome, your knife skills simply blinded my eyes. Your dumplings made me want to cry. It was too delicious. Owner Bu, I want to bear your children. I will always support you. Owner Bu, we really like your dishes. We hope that you will be able to cook even more delicious dishes. We support you. The old couple walked over hand in hand and placed the copper coin on the porcelain plate in front of Bufang as they encouraged him with a smile. Bufang's expression turned serious. He slightly bowed toward the 2 elders and softly said, I will do my best. In an instant, the situation had become completely one-sided. Chef Jean despondently looked at the lone copper coin on his porcelain plate. Where was the promised second coin? Where was the promised peak of life? His bald head gradually dimmed and almost lost all of its luster. Alu grabbed a chicken drumstick from the bag on his apron and fiercely bit into it. His face was filled with enjoyment. Ah Wei, on the other hand, looked at the porcelain plate in front of him with a gloomy expression. It was obvious that his votes were much less than Bufang's. Was he going to lose? How could it be? He had already worked so hard to cook this delicacy. He even used the technique of cooking dishes within dishes, so how could he still lose? Moreover, he lost to a fellow who did not use ingredients with spirit energy. Ah Wei clenched his fists and fiercely bit the corner of his mouth. He was extremely unwilling to accept this result. Smelly boss. This dumpling is super delicious. Will it be sold in the store? Ouyang Xiaoyi cheerfully said as she bounced toward Bufang. She was definitely going to cast her vote for Bufang. Xiao Yanyu, Xiao Xiaolong, and the others also walked over and placed the copper coin on the porcelain plate in front of Bufang. They gently smiled and nodded toward Bufang. The ministers also walked over. Many of them chose Wei's roasted spirit beast, but most of them chose Bufang's rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings. From their point of view, Wei's roasted spirit beast technique had reached an extremely perfect level. However, in terms of emotional investment, it could not be compared to Owner Bu's dumplings at all. The kind of delicacy that could make people feel happy in winter simply left them with endless aftertaste. Owner Bu's delicacies had magic. There was a kind of magic that made them sink into oblivion. I refused to accept this. How could I lose? Wei was unwilling to accept this result. He looked at the few votes on his porcelain plate with an extremely ugly expression on his face. Of course, the few votes on his porcelain plate were already considered not bad compared to the extremely clean porcelain plates of the others. Even his younger brother, Alu, only had a few copper coins. However, Alu did not care. He happily grabbed a chicken drumstick and stuffed it into his mouth, eating happily. You refuse to accept this? Ji Qingxue indifferently glanced at Wei and said, This is the votes of the people. It was chosen by the public. What do you have to accept? Wei was immediately stunned and speechless. Indeed, what Ji Qingxue said made sense. This was not a vote for a single person, but a fair competition. What reason did he have to accept this result? However, he just could not accept it. Why could the dishes he meticulously cooked lose to Bufang's rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings that did not even use spirit energy ingredient? Chef Jean stood at the side with a despondent look on his face. When he heard Wei's question, he also straightened his body and slightly nodded. The taste of spirit energy ingredients could not be compared to ordinary ingredient. This had always been common sense in the culinary world. However, Bufang broke this rule today. Bufang rubbed his stomach and expressionlessly glanced at Wei and the bald Chef Jean. He lightly exhaled a breath of hot air. He indifferently said, You don't accept it? Then eat a bowl. Chapter 155. Bufang's tone was very calm. It did not sound like the arrogant and provocative tone of someone who had achieved victory. Instead, it was as calm as still water, as if everything was only natural. Wei was stunned. He did not expect Bufang to actually say such a thing. However, he was truly a little tempted. He understood in his heart that since Bufang's rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings were able to garner the favor of so many people present, there must be something special about them. All right, give me a bowl and I'll also give you a roasted spirit beast. Wei nodded as he solemnly said to Bufang. This was his temperament and he did not want to take advantage of others. Besides, he also wanted to see Bufang's reaction after tasting his delicacies. Bufang nodded. With a wave of his hand, he blew on the crescent moon dumplings with true energy and they obediently jumped into the wok, creating a splash. Wei walked back to his stove and began to seriously roast the spirit beast. The other chefs present all looked at each other in dismay. They could not help but look toward Bufang and Wei. Were these two really going to compete? Alu was munching on a chicken drumstick as he curiously watched Bufang and Wei cook. He was very familiar with Wei's roasted meat. In his opinion, the taste of the roasted meat was simply too delicious. However, it was even more unbelievable that Owner Bu's dumplings could actually defeat his elder brother's roasted meat. Ji Qingxue observed the atmosphere and a playful smile appeared on his face. He stopped the eunuch who was about to step forward to interrupt them and simply said, Let them finish. The eunuch immediately bowed and retreated behind Ji Qingxue. Ji Qingxue had heard of the two brothers from Qinjiangzhen before. The wildlands was mysterious and unfathomable. Even the imperial court could do nothing about it. Qinjiangzhen was located outside of the wildlands and had its back facing the wildlands, so it was naturally unique. The two brothers' culinary skills were astonishing. If it was not for Honorbu, they would definitely be the champion of this year's 100-family banquet. What a pity! Honorbu's culinary skills were really terrifying. A fragrance quickly drifted out. This was the fragrance of Ah Wei's barbecued meat. The barbecued meat in his hand was vivid and lifelike and had been handled flawlessly. The spirit beast was not big, tender, juicy, and incomparably fragrant. This was the catalyzing effect of roasting the spirit herbs together. Not only was the visual effect good, but the taste was also excellent. On the other hand, on Bu Fang's side, although the rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings were boiling in the hot pot, they also emitted some aroma. However, the aroma was neither strong nor weak. It could only be said to be very ordinary. It was on a completely different level from the aroma of Ah Wei's barbecue. Although most of the chefs were doubtful, and some of them even revealed doubtful gazes, they did not dare to jump to a conclusion. That was because the copper coins on the porcelain plate in front of Bu Fang's stove had already explained everything. There was definitely something hidden in this dish. He scooped out the dumplings from the boiling wok and poured them into a blue and white porcelain bowl. There were 3 dumplings in a bowl. He sprinkled chopped green onions on them, and the dish was done. Ah Wei's dish was also done. Oil was continuously dripping from the roasted spirit beast meat, which was overflowing with fragrance. Honorbu, please have a taste. Ah Wei grabbed the barbecued meat and came in front of Bu Fang. He passed the meat to Bu Fang. Bu Fang took it and smelled a rich fragrance wafting toward him. In an instant, it enveloped his entire body, making him feel as if he was swimming in an ocean of fragrance, unable to extricate himself. This smell was really fragrant. Green smoke curled up from Bu Fang's hand, and then the dragon bone kitchen knife appeared. He gently cut open the stomach of the spirit beast. In an instant, the boiling soup stock flowed out and mixed with the barbecued meat, causing the fragrance to become even more intense. If Bu Fang's rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings were simple and elegant vegetarian orchids, then this rich barbecued meat was a fiery rose. The two were completely different dishes. Bu Fang cut off a piece of meat, dipped it in the rich sauce, and placed it into his mouth with a pair of chopsticks. The crispy skin of the barbecued meat and the tender and juicy meat instantly enveloped Bu Fang's taste bud. His eyes lit up as he continuously nodded his head. On the side, Ah Wei also picked up the bowl of dumplings. The dumplings were as simple and elegant as orchids. At first glance, they were not that breathtaking, but their white and cute appearance made one feel a little more appetizing. "Brother, give me a bite as well," Ah Lu said in a slurred voice as he greedily looked at the bowl of dumplings while chewing on the drumstick. Ah Wei immediately gave him a disdainful glance. "Didn't I tell you not to talk to me while eating? Did you forget again? If you want to eat, bring a spoon over and scoop it up yourself." Ah Lu immediately gave a silly smile and hurriedly found a spoon. He scooped up a dumpling just like Ah Wei and planned to put it into his mouth. White steam was emitted from the dumplings. The faint fragrance of flour was accompanied by the aroma of the dish. It was simple and elegant, but it did not make one sick of it. Ah Wei took a bite and discovered that a rainbow-colored fragrance wafted out from within. It was as if it had transformed into a rainbow, causing him to be incomparably amazed. So, this was the true meaning of the rainbow-colored crescent moon dumplings? Warmth, tranquility, and an extremely blissful feeling spontaneously welled up in one's heart. It was a feeling that had already transcended the definition of delicacy. Ah Wei fell silent as he silently finished the entire dumpling. The expression on his face was fluctuating. Just by eating one dumpling, he already knew that he had truly lost. It was an incomparable defeat. The gap between him and Honorbu seemed to be an insurmountable chasm. On the other side, The fat on Alu's face was squeezed together as he trembled. His eyes were filled with tears, his mouth was moving like waves, and his nose was twitching as he sobbed. "What's wrong with you?" Awe was startled by Alu's appearance. This guy was just eating a dish. Did he have to be so exaggerated? "Brother, I miss my parents." Alu's tears flowed down his cheeks as he stuffed the remaining half of the dumpling into his mouth and mumbled while sobbing uncontrollably. Awe was silent for a moment before he softly sighed. Owner Bu's dishes were really magical. Bufang finished the roasted meat. This time, he actually ate 3 pieces. He himself was also a little surprised. It was obvious that this dish was pretty good. However, whenever Bufang ate a dish, he would habitually criticize it with his venomous tongue. This time, it was no different. "Your roasted meat tastes pretty good, but the way you handled the spirit beast is still a little lacking. The spirit energy of this spirit beast is equivalent to a 3rd-grade spirit beast, but after you handled it like this, the spirit energy in its body dissipated. Furthermore, you used spirit herbs to roast it, but the essence of the spirit herbs was not adhered to the roasted meat. Many unnecessary things were mixed in, which affected the taste. This is the reason why it was a little strange. Also, the sauce in the soup stock." Everyone was dumbstruck as they looked at Bufang, who seemed to have opened up a chatterbox in an instant. This was completely different from the usual concise and comprehensive Owner Bu. Awe's face was also ashen as he listened. However, he was extremely shocked in his heart because every flaw Bufang mentioned was a real flaw in his dish. There were some flaws that he could have avoided, but there were some flaws that even he could not avoid. However, Bufang was able to give such an accurate evaluation after only tasting a few mouthfuls. It was simply terrifying. As expected of the man who defeated me, Awe thought to himself as he raised his chin. After Bufang finished his evaluation, he regained his elegant demeanor and started to clean up the stove. The 100 family banquet finally came to an end. There was no doubt about the winner. Bufang had the most copper coins on his porcelain plate, so he was the winner. There was no applause. Bufang did not feel the so-called joy of winning the prize. He merely glanced at the crowd with an incomparably calm expression, as if this was a matter of course to him. Congratulations to the host for completing the 2nd abrupt mission. Obtain 1st place in the 100 family banquet, crush everyone, and spread the god of cooking's aura. Now announcing the mission reward. The system's serious and solemn voice rang out in Bufang's mind, causing Bufang to fall into a trance. The instant the system's voice rang out, the eunuch on the high platform announced the final winner and announced the reward for the winner of the 100 family banquet. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.